In the cold, dark water of the North Atlantic and the Arctic, below the reach of the seasons and the weather, there are animals alive at this moment that were born before most of the modern world existed. An individual swimming in those waters today may have been born in the 16th or 17th century before the telescope was turned on the sky, before the founding of most of the nations that now border its ocean, before the events ordinarily treated as the beginning of the modern age. It is not a colony, not a simple organism that persists through replacement, and not a creature that merely endures at the edge of life. It is a large, active, predatory shark, and it has been swimming, slowly, through the same cold water since before the modern era began. The environment it occupies is among the most stable on the planet. The deep water of the Arctic and the North Atlantic holds close to freezing, varies little from season to season or century to century, and lies beyond the reach of the sunlight and the surface weather that transform the shallow ocean. It is a slow, cold, and constant world, and the animal that is the subject of this account is adapted to it with a completeness that extends to the very tempo of its life. Its name is the Greenland shark, Somniosus microcephalus, and nearly everything about it runs against ordinary expectation. It is among the largest sharks in the ocean and among the slowest moving. It is a formidable predator and effectively blind. It lives, on the best current evidence, longer than any other animal with a backbone, and yet it reaches adulthood only after a childhood of some 150 years. These facts assemble into a set of questions that organize everything that follows. How does an animal that is slow, cold to the point of near torpor, and functionally blind come to occupy the position of an apex predator in its ecosystem? How does any vertebrate live for 3, 4, or possibly 5 centuries? And what does such a lifespan do to the biology of the animal that carries it? And how is it that a large shark, known to science for over 200 years and hunted by people for far longer, remains so poorly understood that some of the most basic facts of its life, how it catches its prey, how long it carries its young, how many it bears, where it is born, are still, in the present decade, matters of genuine uncertainty? Before the account continues, a note on what it covers. This is a portrait of a single animal and the cold, deep world it inhabits, the frigid waters of the Arctic and the North Atlantic, and the extreme adaptations, unresolved mysteries, and extraordinary longevity of the shark that rules them. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? If these accounts of the deep ocean and its least understood inhabitants hold your attention, consider subscribing so that the work of assembling them can continue. Settle in and let the surface world recede beneath the slow, cold record of an animal that has outlived every human being who ever saw it. The account begins not with the shark's age, which is its most famous attribute, but with its family, the small group of cold water sharks to which it belongs, and whose very name describes the quality that most defines them. The Greenland shark belongs to a family of sharks whose name captures, more accurately than most common names manage, the essential character of its members. They are the sleeper sharks, the family Somniosidae, and the genus to which the Greenland shark belongs carries the same meaning in Latin, somniosus, from the word for sleep. The name was not chosen arbitrarily. These are among the slowest and least active sharks in the ocean, animals that move through their cold, deep habitat with a deliberateness that gives them, to human eyes, the appearance of sleepwalking, and the Greenland shark is the largest and most studied of them. The genus contains several species, distributed through the cold waters of the world in a pattern that mirrors the cold itself. The Greenland shark, Somniosus microcephalus, occupies the North Atlantic and the Arctic. In the North Pacific, its counterpart is the Pacific sleeper shark, Somniosus pacificus, a closely related animal of similar habits and comparable size. In the cold waters of the southern hemisphere, around the sub-Antarctic, is the southern sleeper shark, Somniosus antarcticus. Together, the sleeper sharks form a lineage adapted to cold, deep water wherever it occurs, and the resemblances among them are close enough that the boundaries between the species and the full extent of each one's range remain in some respects unsettled, a point that becomes significant later, when the account turns to the surprising places the Greenland shark has been recorded. The species name of the Greenland shark, microcephalus, means small-headed, and it points to a feature that will recur throughout this account. Relative to its considerable body, the Greenland shark's head and the brain within it are small. This is not a sign of deficiency, but of specialization. An animal that has invested little in the faculties it does not need, and a great deal in the few it does. The common names the shark has accumulated over centuries of human contact tell a similar story of an animal defined by its slowness and its unglamorous appearance. Sleeper shark, ground shark, gurry shark, gray shark. Each name records some aspect of a large, slow, gray animal that moves along the bottom and shows no urgency in anything it does. What unites the sleeper sharks, and what the account will examine in the Greenland shark specifically, is a coherent strategy of life organized around cold and slowness. In near-freezing water, the chemistry of life proceeds at a reduced pace, and an animal adapted to such water is under no pressure to move quickly, react quickly, or live quickly. The sleeper sharks have taken that condition to an extreme, becoming animals of extraordinary slowness, low metabolism, and as the account will show, extraordinary length of life. The Greenland shark is the fullest expression of that strategy. The largest of the sleeper sharks, the coldest in its habits, and the longest lived vertebrate known. To understand how it lives, the account turns first to the body that cold has shaped. The Greenland shark is a large animal. It reaches lengths beyond 5 meters, with a maximum confirmed length of around 6.5 meters and reported lengths approaching 7, and a mass that can exceed 1,000 kilograms. In bulk, it ranks among the largest sharks in the ocean, comparable in size to the great white, though it presents an entirely different aspect. Where the great white is built for speed and power, the Greenland shark is built for endurance in cold, and its body reflects that purpose in every respect. It is heavy and cylindrical, with a blunt, rounded snout and small fins, colored a mottled gray or brown that has earned it comparisons to a large, slow-moving stone. There is nothing in its form that suggests a fast or aggressive predator. Everything suggests an animal designed to persist, at low cost, in extreme cold. The cold is the defining fact of its physiology. The Greenland shark is an ectotherm, a cold-blooded animal whose body temperature matches that of the surrounding water, and the water it inhabits hovers near freezing, in many parts of its range between roughly -1 and a few degrees above zero. At such temperatures, the biochemical reactions that drive an animal's metabolism proceed extremely slowly, and the Greenland shark does not fight this condition but embodies it. Its metabolic rate is among the lowest recorded for any large animal, and the pace of its entire existence, its movement, its growth, its heartbeat, the whole tempo of its biology is set by the cold water in which it lives. To live as the Greenland shark lives is to live slowly, because the temperature of its world permits nothing else. Living in near-freezing water imposes specific chemical problems, and the shark's solutions to them connect directly to features examined later in this account. Like all sharks and rays, the Greenland shark retains high concentrations of nitrogenous compounds, urea and trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO, in its tissues, where they serve to balance the salt concentration of seawater. In the Greenland shark, these compounds occur at especially high levels, and they perform additional functions suited to its environment. They contribute to the animal's buoyancy, and the TMAO in particular helps to stabilize the shark's proteins against the destabilizing effects of cold and pressure, keeping the molecular machinery of its cells working in conditions that would impair it otherwise. The same chemistry that allows the shark to function in the cold deep has a consequence for anything that might try to eat it, a consequence the account returns to when it reaches the question of the shark's flesh. The overall design is an animal of remarkable coherence. Every element, the heavy, unhurried body, the low metabolism, the cold-stabilized biochemistry, the small head and small brain, belongs to a single strategy of slow, economical, cold-adapted life. The Greenland shark is not a fast predator that happens to live in cold water. It is an animal wholly organized around the cold, and its slowness is not a limitation imposed on it but the central principle of its design. That slowness is most visible in the way it moves, and it raises the first of the shark's genuine paradoxes: how an animal this slow feeds itself at all. The Greenland shark moves more slowly than almost any other fish of its size. Measurements of swimming animals have recorded an average cruising speed of around 1/3 of a meter per second, roughly 1 kilometer per hour, with a maximum sustained speed of only about 3/4 of a meter per second. Its tail beats at a correspondingly low frequency, and when its swimming speed and tail beat frequency are corrected for its large body size, they register as the slowest recorded for any fish species. This is the physical basis of the sleeper shark name, an animal that proceeds through the water with so little apparent effort or urgency that it seems barely awake. The slowness follows directly from the cold and the low metabolism it produces. Rapid, Powerful swimming requires the fast-twitch muscle fibers that contract quickly and burn energy at a high rate, and it requires a metabolism able to supply that energy. The Greenland shark, adapted to near-freezing water and extreme metabolic economy, has neither in abundance. Its muscle is not built for bursts of speed, and its whole physiology is oriented toward conserving energy rather than expending it. In an environment where food is scarce and hard-won, this economy is an advantage. An animal that spends almost nothing can survive on almost nothing, and the Greenland shark's slowness is inseparable from its capacity to endure the long intervals between meals that its cold, food-poor habitat imposes. But slowness of this degree creates an obvious problem for a predator, and it is the problem that has puzzled the biologists who study the species. Many of the animals found in the stomachs of Greenland sharks are fast, considerably faster than the shark itself. A predator that cruises at 1 kilometer per hour cannot run down prey that moves several times as quickly, and cannot, by any straightforward account, catch a healthy seal or a fast-swimming fish in open water. And yet the evidence of what these sharks have eaten includes exactly such animals. The discrepancy between the shark's lethargic movement and the speed of its prey is, in the words of the researchers who have documented it, a puzzle noted for decades, and it is one of the genuine, unresolved questions of the species' biology. Before that question can be addressed, however, there is a further peculiarity of the Greenland shark that seems only to deepen the difficulty. The animal that catches this fast-moving prey is, in almost every case, effectively blind. Nearly every adult Greenland shark carries, attached to the surface of each eye, a small animal that has spent the shark's life slowly destroying its vision. The animal is not a worm, though it resembles one. It is a parasitic copepod, a type of crustacean named Omatocoita elongata, and its relationship with the Greenland shark is among the most peculiar host-parasite associations in the ocean. The copepod is a few centimeters long, pinkish-white, and it attaches itself permanently to the shark's cornea, typically one to each eye, anchoring into the surface of the eye by a specialized structure and feeding on the tissue there. The consequences for the shark's vision are severe. As the parasite feeds and remains attached over years, it causes scarring, clouding, and erosion of the cornea, and the damage accumulates until the eye is largely or wholly opaque. Studies of infected sharks, including detailed examinations of the ocular lesions by the researchers Borusinska, Benz, and colleagues in the late 1990s, have concluded that the attachment of Omatocoita can cause severe visual impairment, possibly including complete blindness in the affected eye, and the parasite is not an occasional affliction. Surveys have found it on the great majority of adult Greenland sharks, by many estimates approaching the entire adult population, so that infection is not the exception but effectively the rule. A mature Greenland shark, in the ordinary course of its life, is an animal whose eyes have been clouded by parasites, an animal that is, for practical purposes, blind. The parasite was recognized early in the scientific study of the species. It was first described in 1827 by the naturalist Robert Edmund Grant from specimens taken from the eyes of Greenland sharks in the Arctic, and it has been a subject of study ever since. Its life cycle is only partly understood. It is thought to be free, swimming at some stage before it locates a host and attaches to the eye, but much of the process by which it finds and colonizes the shark remains undocumented. What is clear is the thoroughness of the association. Omatocoita elongata is found almost exclusively on the Greenland shark and its close relative, the Pacific sleeper shark, and on those hosts, it is nearly universal, a parasite so consistently present that the blindness it causes can be considered a normal condition of the adult animal. The obvious question is why this does not disable the shark, and the answer reshapes the entire picture of how the Greenland shark lives. A blind predator would seem to be a contradiction, an animal unable to find or catch its food. But the Greenland shark is not disabled by its blindness, and the reason is that vision was never central to how it hunts. This fact has, however, given rise to a further and more contentious idea, the suggestion that the parasite is not merely tolerated by the shark but is, in some way, useful to it, and that idea, though it has circulated for decades and appears widely in popular accounts, does not survive close examination. One of the most frequently repeated claims about the Greenland shark concerns the parasite in its eye, and it is a claim that deserves careful handling because it is both appealing and, on the evidence, unlikely. The idea is that the relationship between the shark and Omatocoita elongata is not truly parasitic but mutually beneficial, that the copepod, dangling from the shark's cornea, produces light and that this light attracts prey toward the shark's mouth in the darkness of the deep. On this account, the shark trades its already limited vision for a living lure, and the parasite gains a mobile home in exchange for helping to feed its host. It is a tidy and memorable story, and it appears throughout popular treatments of the species. The hypothesis has a real scientific origin. It was proposed in the middle of the 20th century, notably by the researcher Burland in 1961, who observed the copepod's pale coloration and speculated that it might be bioluminescent, producing light that could draw prey to the near-blind shark in the deep. The suggestion was reasonable as speculation. Bioluminescence is common in the deep sea. Prey attraction by light is a documented strategy in other animals, and a glowing object on the eye of a blind predator would, if it existed, be a striking example of a parasite turned to advantage. The idea entered the literature, and, from there, the wider public account of the species, where it has persisted for over half a century. But the evidence has not supported it, and the honest current position is that the hypothesis is unconfirmed and now considered unlikely. The central problem is straightforward. Omatocoita elongata has not been shown to be bioluminescent. The original suggestion rested on the copepod's appearance rather than on any demonstration that it actually produces light, and subsequent examination has not established that it does. Without confirmed bioluminescence, the mechanism the hypothesis depends upon does not exist, and the mutualism it proposes has no basis. The parasite causes real and documented damage to the shark's eye. The compensating benefit that would make the relationship mutual has never been demonstrated. The most that can be said is that the shark tolerates the parasite well, because it does not depend on vision, not that the parasite helps it. The persistence of the glowing lure story, in the face of the evidence against it, is itself worth noting, because it illustrates a pattern that recurs in the popular account of the Greenland shark. The animal is so strange, and so much about it remains genuinely unknown, that appealing explanations attach themselves to it and prove difficult to dislodge, repeated long after the evidence has turned against them. The truthful account is less tidy. The Greenland shark is a predator that has been blinded by a parasite it cannot remove, and it hunts successfully anyway, not because the parasite helps it, but because it never needed its eyes in the first place. The senses it does rely upon are the subject of the next chapter, and they explain how a blind animal navigates and feeds in a world of total darkness. That the Greenland shark can lose its vision almost entirely and remain an effective predator points to a basic fact about the environment it inhabits. In the deep and the dark, sight is of limited use, and the animals that live there rely on other senses. For much of the Greenland shark's range and at much of the depth it occupies, there is little or no light to see by in any case, and an animal built to hunt there must locate its food by other means. The Greenland shark is built precisely so, and the design of its nervous system reflects the priority it places on senses other than vision. The dominant sense is smell. The Greenland shark's brain, though small relative to its large body, is organized around olfaction to a striking degree. The olfactory bulb, the part of the brain devoted to processing smell, is proportionally very large, by some accounts amounting to roughly a third of the brain's mass. The animal is, in a functional sense, a large swimming detector of scent, able to sense chemical traces in the water across considerable distances and to track them to their source. In an environment where food is scarce and widely scattered, a sunken carcass here, a food fall there, the ability to detect and follow a scent trail through kilometers of dark water is far more valuable than the ability to see, and the Greenland shark has invested its limited neural resources accordingly. A clouded eye is no great loss to an animal that finds its food by smell. Smell is not the shark's only non-visual sense. Like other sharks, the Greenland shark possesses a well-developed lateral line, a system of fluid-filled canals running beneath the skin along the sides of the body and over the head, lined with sensory cells that detect movement and vibration in the surrounding water. Through the lateral line, the shark can sense the disturbances created by moving animals and by currents, building a picture of its surroundings from pressure and motion rather than light. Sharks also possess electroreception, the ability to detect the faint electrical fields generated by living animals, which allows a predator to sense nearby prey even in complete darkness, and even when the prey is motionless or concealed. Between smell, the lateral line, and electroreception, the Greenland shark has a rich sensory access to its world that owes nothing to vision. The picture that emerges corrects the impression left by the shark's blindness. It is not an animal struggling against a handicap, feeling its way through the dark in spite of ruined eyes. It is an animal for which vision was always a minor sense, equipped with a suite of other senses well matched to the lightless world it hunts in, and losing its sight costs it little because it hunted by other means from the start. This resolves the apparent paradox of the blind predator. It does not, however, resolve the deeper puzzle of how so slow an animal catches such fast prey, a puzzle that begins with the surprising contents of the Greenland shark's stomach. The most direct evidence of what an animal eats is the contents of its stomach, and the stomachs of Greenland sharks, examined over many years, have revealed a diet far broader and stranger than the shark's sluggish appearance would suggest. The bulk of it is fish, Atlantic cod, Greenland halibut, redfish, char, and a range of other species, including smaller sharks and skates. But alongside the fish are animals that a slow-moving bottom dweller would not obviously be expected to catch. Seals, particularly ringed seals, and the remains of small cetaceans. And alongside those are items stranger, still the remains of seabirds, and, recovered from Greenland shark stomachs over the years, the remains of land animals including reindeer, horses, dogs, and, in documented cases, moose and polar bears. The land animals are the least mysterious, because they are almost certainly scavenged rather than hunted. The Greenland shark is a committed scavenger, drawn by its acute sense of smell to carrion of all kinds, and a large carcass that enters the water, an animal that is drowned, fallen through ice, or been discarded, is exactly the kind of concentrated food fall that the shark is built to detect and exploit. The presence of a reindeer or a polar bear in a shark's stomach is a record not of an improbable hunt but of the shark's opportunism, its readiness to consume whatever dead material it encounters. In this respect, the Greenland shark resembles the other large scavengers of the cold deep, filling the ecological role of the animal that finds and processes the dead. The seals are the genuine puzzle. Analysis of stomach contents has shown that larger Greenland sharks occupy a high trophic position, consistent with a diet that includes marine mammals, and the seals found in their stomachs are not always obviously scavenged. Studies combining stomach content analysis with stable isotope measurements, which reveal the long-term trophic level of an animal from the chemistry of its tissues, have confirmed that seals form a real part of the diet of larger sharks, and that the diet shifts as the shark grows, with larger individuals taking higher trophic prey. The question is not whether Greenland sharks eat seals. The evidence is clear that they do. The question is how an animal that swims at a fraction of a seal's speed comes to have a seal in its stomach at all. And the answer to that question turns on a specific and revealing detail about the state of the seals when they are found. The clue that has guided attempts to resolve the diet paradox is the condition of the seals recovered from Greenland shark stomachs. When a large animal dies and its carcass is scavenged on the seafloor, the process leaves traces. The carcass is typically colonized by a succession of scavenging invertebrates, and remains that have lain dead for some time carry the signs of that colonization. But researchers, notably Leclerc and colleagues in work published around 2012, have documented cases of Greenland sharks containing seals that were intact and freshly ingested, lacking the invertebrate scavengers that would accompany a carcass consumed after death. The absence of those scavengers points to a specific conclusion. The seals had not been found dead and eaten as carrion. They had been swallowed during, or shortly after, a recent hunting event. The Greenland shark, on this evidence, does not merely scavenge dead seals, it kills live ones. How it does so remains, in the strict sense, unresolved, but the leading hypothesis is both plausible and revealing. The Greenland shark cannot outswim a seal. No measurement of its speed leaves any possibility that it could run one down in open water. What it may be able to do is ambush a seal that is not moving. Seals rest and sleep in the water as well as on land or ice, and there is a specific reason they may do so. On land and on the ice, they are exposed to predators such as polar bears, and sleeping in the water column may be a strategy to avoid that danger. A seal asleep in the water, however, is vulnerable to a different predator, a large, dark, slow-moving shark able to approach without detection through the cold and the dark. The hypothesis, advanced by researchers, including those who documented the fresh seal evidence, is that the Greenland shark preys on sleeping seals, closing the final distance to a motionless animal that never perceives its approach. Several features of the shark's biology support the plausibility of this strategy. Its mottled gray coloration provides camouflage in the dim water, allowing it to approach prey undetected. Its slow, quiet movement produces little disturbance that might wake a sleeping animal, and its method of capture, once within range, does not depend on a fast final lunge. Like other sleeper sharks, the Greenland shark can rapidly expand its mouth cavity to generate a powerful inrush of water, a suction that draws prey into the mouth. This suction feeding is thought to explain why whole prey specimens are so often found in Greenland shark stomachs. The animal is drawn in entire rather than bitten in pieces, and it means the shark does not need speed at the moment of capture, only proximity and surprise. A predator that can approach a sleeping seal unnoticed and then draw it in by suction has no need to be fast. The hypothesis is coherent, it fits the evidence, and it remains, importantly, a hypothesis. Direct observation of a Greenland shark hunting a seal has not been achieved. The deep, cold, dark, remote conditions in which it hunts are precisely those in which such behavior is most difficult to witness. The conclusion that the shark ambushes sleeping seals is inferred from the state of the prey in its stomach and from the shark's evident inability to catch them by pursuit, not from any recorded hunt. This is characteristic of the Greenland shark as a subject. Even its manner of feeding, one of the most basic facts about any animal, is known largely by inference, reconstructed from indirect evidence about an animal that has almost never been observed doing the thing in question. The resolution of the diet paradox is not a proven mechanism, but the best available reconstruction, and it stands until direct observation either confirms or overturns it. The same cold water chemistry that allows the Greenland shark to function in near-freezing water has a consequence that shapes both its relationship with potential predators and its long history of contact with human beings. The shark's flesh is toxic. The toxicity is not a defense. The animal evolved deliberately, in the manner of a venom or a warning color. It is a byproduct of the chemical adaptations that allow the shark to live where it does, and understanding it requires returning to the compounds introduced earlier, urea and trimethylamine N-oxide. Like all sharks and rays, the Greenland shark retains urea and TMAO in its tissues as part of the way it balances the salt concentration of its body against the surrounding seawater. In the Greenland shark, these compounds occur at particularly high concentrations, serving the additional roles of maintaining buoyancy and, in the case of TMAO, stabilizing the animal's proteins against the effects of cold and pressure. Within the living shark, this is a functional and necessary chemistry. The problem arises when the flesh is eaten. When another animal consumes the shark's tissue, the TMAO it contains is metabolized, reduced by the action of gut bacteria into trimethylamine, or TMA, and TMA is toxic. The scientific analysis of this effect, notably the work of Anthony and colleagues published in 1991, identified TMA arising from the reduction of TMAO as the substance responsible for the poisoning that follows consumption of Greenland shark flesh. The effects of that poisoning are distinctive enough to have acquired their own names. In humans, eating the fresh flesh produces symptoms resembling acute intoxication, a loss of balance and coordination, slurred speech, nausea, and, in severe cases, convulsions, a condition sometimes rendered directly as being shark drunk. The same effect appears in other animals. Sled dogs fed the fresh flesh have been recorded as unable to stand, incapacitated by the same reduction of TMAO to TMA. The toxicity is a property of the fresh flesh, specifically, and it belongs to the Greenland shark and its close relatives among the sleeper sharks, rather than to sharks in general. While all elasmobranchs carry urea and TMAO, the concentrations in the Greenland shark are high enough to make its untreated flesh genuinely dangerous to eat. The consequence, for the shark, is a kind of chemical protection it did not evolve for the purpose. An animal whose flesh induces intoxication and incapacitation is not an attractive meal, and the toxicity may contribute to the near absence of predators willing to take an adult Greenland shark. But the more remarkable consequence is cultural rather than ecological, because human beings, confronted with a large and abundant animal whose flesh was poisonous, did not abandon it. In the cold lands of the North Atlantic, where food was not to be wasted, people found a way to render the toxic flesh edible, and in doing so created one of the most notorious foods in the world. The transformation of the Greenland shark's poisonous flesh into food is an achievement of traditional food preparation, developed over centuries in Iceland, and the result is a dish called hakarl, or more precisely, castor hakarl, literally, fermented shark. It is among the most infamous foods in the world, notorious for a smell frequently compared to strong ammonia or cleaning fluid, and it exists because the people of a harsh northern environment worked out how to neutralize a toxin without the aid of any chemical understanding of what they were doing. The process is one of controlled decomposition. The shark is gutted and beheaded, and the flesh is then subjected to a long fermentation, traditionally by burying it in gravel or coarse sediment, which allows fluids to drain and encourages the anaerobic action of bacteria and the shark's own enzymes. This stage lasts on the order of 6 to 12 weeks, during which the chemistry of the flesh is transformed. The toxic compounds break down, the acidity shifts, and analyses tracking the process have found that the TMAO responsible for the toxicity falls to undetectable levels within a matter of weeks. After the fermentation, the flesh is hung to air dry for several further months, during which much of the remaining trimethylamine and ammonia evaporates away. What remains is a firm, cured flesh, cut into cubes, with a powerful odor and an acquired taste, and crucially, without the toxin that made the fresh flesh dangerous. The fermentation accomplishes outside the body, in a controlled and gradual way, the same breakdown that would otherwise occur inside the body of anyone who ate the flesh fresh, allowing the toxic products to dissipate harmlessly into the air, rather than into a consumer. Hakkarl occupies a specific place in Icelandic culture. It is associated in particular with Þjóðhátíð, a midwinter festival at which traditional foods are eaten. And it survives as a cultural staple and a point of national identity, as well as a notorious ordeal for visitors unaccustomed to its smell and flavor. Its persistence is a record of a long relationship between a people and an animal, a relationship in which a large, abundant, and toxic shark was not left uneaten but was made, through patience and accumulated knowledge, into food. The dish is a monument to that ingenuity, and to the length of the human association with the Greenland shark, which extends back through the whole history of settlement in the North Atlantic. The toxic flesh and the fermented dish it gave rise to are the most direct expression of the Greenland shark's long entanglement with people. But they are not the only one. The same abundance and size that made the shark worth the trouble of detoxifying also made it a target of a large and now largely forgotten industry, and that history, along with the conservation questions it raises, is taken up later in this account. First, however, the account turns to the attribute for which the Greenland shark is now most known, and which was established only recently by an ingenious solution to a genuinely difficult problem: the question of how long the animal lives. The Greenland shark is now widely known as the longest-lived vertebrate on Earth, but that knowledge is recent, and the difficulty of establishing it is a story in itself. A story about the limits of the ordinary methods for determining an animal's age, and about the ingenuity required to circumvent them. For most of the time, the Greenland shark has been known to science. Its age was a matter of educated guesswork, because the standard techniques for aging fish do not work on it. The usual methods depend on hard structures that grow in increments, laying down layers at regular intervals, in a manner that can be counted much as the rings of a tree are counted. In bony fish, the structures typically used are the otoliths, small calcified bodies in the inner ear, and the vertebrae and other calcified tissues can serve a similar purpose in many species, including many sharks. Counting the growth bands in such a structure gives an estimate of the animal's age. The Greenland shark, however, has very little calcified tissue of the kind these methods require. It is a soft-bodied shark without the dense, layered hard parts that aging techniques rely upon, and the structures that might otherwise be counted are largely absent. The standard toolkit for determining a fish's age simply does not apply to it. What could be inferred pointed toward great longevity without being able to establish it. The Greenland shark's growth is extraordinarily slow. Estimates place it at roughly 1 centimeter per year, and a mark and recapture record from the 20th century, in which a shark tagged off Greenland in 1936 was recaptured in 1952, supported growth rates of that order. An animal that grows only a centimeter or so a year and reaches lengths beyond 5 meters must, by simple arithmetic, be very old, and this reasoning suggested lifespans far longer than those of ordinary fish. But arithmetic from an approximate growth rate is not a measurement, and it could not establish how long the largest sharks had actually lived, or fix the lifespan of the species with any confidence. For that, a different kind of evidence was needed, one that did not depend on counting growth bands the shark did not possess. The solution, when it came, drew on an unexpected source. Not a calcified structure at all, but the transparent tissue of the shark's own eye, and a form of dating originally developed for entirely different purposes. It resolved the question of the Greenland shark's age with a precision that, for all its uncertainty, transformed the animal from a suspected long liver into the confirmed record holder among vertebrates, and it did so by reading a chemical signature laid down at the very beginning of each animal's life. The technique that finally established the age of the Greenland shark was radiocarbon dating, applied to a specific and unusual tissue, the nucleus of the eye lens. The reasoning behind the method rests on a particular property of that tissue. The lens of a vertebrate eye is built up in layers over the animal's life, but its innermost portion, the nucleus, is formed early, before birth, and thereafter remains metabolically inert. It is not remodeled, not replaced, and not chemically altered over the animal's lifetime. The chemical composition of the lens nucleus therefore preserves a record of the conditions at the time it was formed, which is to say at the very beginning of the animal's life. If the age of that tissue can be determined, the age of the animal follows. Radiocarbon provides the means to determine it. Radiocarbon, a naturally occurring radioactive form of carbon, is present in the environment and is incorporated into living tissue, and its concentration in tissue formed at a given time reflects the environmental levels at that time. The method acquired a particularly sharp tool from an unlikely source. The atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons in the 1950s and early 1960s, which released a pulse of radiocarbon into the environment and left a distinct, datable marker, the bomb pulse, in tissues formed during and after that period. Tissue formed before the early 1960s lacks this marker. Tissue formed after it carries it. This provides a chronological reference point against which the radiocarbon content of a tissue can be interpreted. The application of this method to the Greenland shark was reported in a landmark study published in the journal Science in 2016, led by Julius Nielsen of the University of Copenhagen. The researchers extracted the eye lens nuclei of 28 female Greenland sharks and measured their radiocarbon content. The results were remarkable. Only the smallest sharks, those of around 220 centimeters or less, showed the mark of the bomb pulse, indicating that only they had been born after the early 1960s. Every larger shark had been born before it. Calibrating the radiocarbon measurements against the known chronology allowed the researchers to estimate the ages of the individual animals, and the estimates extended far beyond those of any previously documented vertebrate. The analysis indicated a lifespan for the species of at least 272 years. The precision of the method has limits, and they should be stated alongside the result. Radiocarbon dating of this kind carries a substantial margin of uncertainty, and the ages of the oldest individuals are given as ranges rather than exact figures. But even with those uncertainties, the conclusion was secure in its essentials. The Greenland shark lives for centuries, longer than any other vertebrate known, and the method that established this reading the age of an animal from a chemical signature preserved in the inert core of its eye is among the more elegant solutions in the study of animal life. What the numbers actually mean, when translated into the span of human history, is the subject of the next chapter. The figures produced by the eye lens study are difficult to absorb because they exceed the range of lifespans that any intuition about animals prepares one for. The analysis estimated an average lifespan for the species of at least 272 years. The two largest sharks in the study, measuring around 493 and 502 centimeters, were estimated at roughly 335 and 392 years of age, respectively. The oldest, at 392 years, carried a stated uncertainty of plus or minus 120 years, meaning the true age of that single animal lay somewhere between roughly 270 and 512 years. On any reading within that range, the Greenland shark is the longest-lived vertebrate known to science. Translating those figures into human history conveys what they mean more effectively than the numbers alone. An animal estimated at the upper end of the range, some 500 years old, would have been born around the beginning of the 16th century at a date, on one much-cited comparison, close to the year Michelangelo completed his sculpture of David. A shark of the more central estimate, near 400 years, would have been born in the early 17th century, in the lifetimes of Galileo and Shakespeare. These are not the timescales of animal lives as ordinarily understood. They are the timescales of human history, of the rise and passing of institutions and eras. An individual Greenland shark may have been alive and swimming slowly through the cold Arctic water across the entire span of the modern age through the whole history that most people would recognize as the story of the modern world. The claim requires the same care that attended the age estimates themselves, and it is worth being precise about its status. It is not asserted that any particular shark is known to be 500 years old. The uncertainties forbid such precision about any single animal. What the evidence establishes is that the species attains ages measured in centuries, that its typical lifespan runs to at least 270 years, and that its longest-lived individuals may reach 400 or 500. Compared against the other long-lived vertebrates, the bowhead whale, which may live over 2 centuries, and the giant tortoises, which may exceed a century and a half, the Greenland shark stands clearly first, its lifespan roughly doubling that of its nearest rivals among animals with backbones. Such a lifespan is not merely a record to be noted. It is a biological problem to be explained, and it raises questions that reach beyond the single species. An animal that lives for centuries must solve difficulties that shorter-lived animals never encounter, must maintain its body, resist disease, and avoid the accumulated damage that ordinarily limits how long a large animal can live. The existence of a vertebrate that lives for 400 or 500 years is, in this sense, a challenge to the general understanding of why animals age and die at all, and it is bound up with one of the more striking puzzles in the biology of size and lifespan, the puzzle of why a very large, very long-lived animal is not, as the ordinary logic of cancer would predict, riddled with tumors long before it reaches such an age. Among the consequences of the Greenland shark's extreme longevity, one stands out for its strangeness, even against the strangeness of the lifespan itself, the age at which the animal reaches maturity. The same island study that established the shark's lifespan also allowed an estimate of the age at which it becomes capable of reproduction, and the figure is difficult to reconcile with any ordinary sense of an animal's life. Female Greenland sharks are estimated to reach sexual maturity only at a length of around 4 meters, and, given the shark's growth rate, that length corresponds to an age of approximately 150 years. A Greenland shark spends, on this evidence, roughly its first century and a half in a prolonged juvenile state, not yet able to reproduce. The implication is worth stating directly, because it inverts the normal relationship between an animal's life and the human timescale. A Greenland shark that reaches maturity today, at an age of 150 years, would have been born in the middle of the 19th century. It would have spent the entire 20th century, and the decades on either side of it, growing slowly toward an adulthood it reached only in the present era. An animal born at the time of comparable historical events a century and a half ago would, if it were a Greenland shark, be only now arriving at the beginning of its reproductive life. The juvenile period alone exceeds the entire lifespan of almost every other vertebrate. This extraordinarily delayed maturity is a coherent part of the shark's slow strategy of life. In an animal that lives for centuries, a maturation period of a century and a half is not disproportionate. It is scaled to the whole. The shark grows slowly because it is cold and its metabolism is low. It matures late because it grows slowly, and it can afford to mature late because it lives so long that a century and a half of childhood still leaves centuries of adult life for reproduction. Each element fits with the others in the same unified strategy of slowness that governs the animal's whole existence. Within the logic of the Greenland shark's life, a 150-year childhood is not an anomaly but a proportionate feature of a life measured in centuries. Within a wider logic, however, it carries a serious vulnerability, and the account returns to it later when it reaches the question of conservation. An animal that does not reproduce until it is 150 years old cannot replace its losses quickly. A population reduced by human activity cannot recover within any human timescale because the survivors take longer than a human lifetime simply to begin breeding. The delayed maturity that fits so neatly within the shark's own slow life becomes a grave liability the moment that life is subjected to pressures acting faster than it can respond. Before that vulnerability is examined, however, the biology of the long life itself raises a further question, one that concerns not how long the shark lives, but how it manages to live that long without succumbing to the disease that ought, by ordinary reasoning, to kill it first. An animal that lives for centuries poses a problem that shorter-lived animals do not, and it is a problem rooted in the basic biology of cancer. Cancer arises when a cell accumulates mutations that cause it to divide without restraint. Every time a cell divides, there is a small chance that such a mutation occurs, and so the risk of cancer rises, in principle, with the number of cell divisions an organism undergoes, which is to say, with both its size and its lifespan. A larger animal has more cells, and each is a potential origin of a tumor. A longer-lived animal has more time for such mutations to accumulate. By this reasoning, a very large and very long-lived animal should be overwhelmingly likely to develop cancer, and an animal the size of a Greenland shark that lives for 4 or 5 centuries should, on the simplest expectation, be riddled with it. Yet the largest and longest-lived animals are not disproportionately afflicted by cancer, and this discrepancy between expectation and observation is known as Peto's paradox. after the researcher who noted that the incidence of cancer across species does not rise with body size as the simple logic predicts. Great whales, which have vastly more cells than humans and live comparably long or longer, do not suffer correspondingly more cancer. Elephants, far larger than humans, do not either. The paradox implies that large, long-lived animals must have evolved mechanisms that suppress cancer more effectively than those of smaller, shorter-lived species, additional defenses that offset the greater risk their size and longevity would otherwise impose. Each such animal represents a natural experiment in cancer suppression, and the Greenland shark, as the longest-lived vertebrate, represents the most extreme case among the animals with backbones. The expectation, therefore, is that the Greenland shark possesses cancer-suppressing and damage-repairing mechanisms of unusual effectiveness, defenses robust enough to keep a very large body functioning, largely free of runaway cellular damage, across the better part of 5 centuries. An animal that maintains itself for that long must not only avoid cancer but resist the whole accumulation of molecular damage that ordinarily degrades a body over time. The errors in its DNA, the deterioration of its tissues, the decline in the systems that keep it alive. The question of how the Greenland shark does this is among the most actively pursued in the study of the species, not only for what it reveals about the shark, but for what it might reveal about aging in general, including in humans. And the pursuit of an answer has, in the present decade, turned to the shark's own genetic blueprint. The most recent chapter in the study of the Greenland shark's longevity has come from genomics, the reading of the animal's complete genetic code, in search of the mechanisms that might underlie its extraordinary lifespan. In work reported in 2025, an international team led by researchers at the University of Tokyo produced the first chromosome-level assembly of the Greenland shark's genome, a near-complete map of the animal's genetic material, and analyzed it for features that might distinguish a vertebrate capable of living for centuries from its shorter-lived relatives. The genome itself proved unusual in scale. At around 5.9 billion base pairs, it is roughly twice the size of the human genome and among the largest of any shark examined. Within it, the researchers identified patterns consistent with the expectations set by the shark's longevity. Certain families of genes were found to be expanded present in more copies than in shorter-lived species, and the expanded families were concentrated in functions directly relevant to maintaining a body over a very long body life, DNA, repair, immune function, and the regulation of cell growth and death. The analysis highlighted, in particular, gene families involved in a cellular signaling pathway known as NF-kappa B, which governs inflammation, immune response, cell division, and programs cell death, all processes closely tied to cancer, aging, and the maintenance of a healthy body. The researchers also noted an altered version of a gene central to tumor suppression and DNA repair, and further features relating to the stability of the genome and resistance to cellular stress. Taken together, these were interpreted as a possible genetic foundation for the shark's longevity and its apparent resistance to disease, and as a potential resolution, at the molecular level, of the Peto's paradox question of how so large and long-lived an animal keeps cancer at bay. The proper interpretation of these findings requires restraint, and the more careful accounts of the work supply it. What the genome analysis identifies are associations, genes, and gene families whose expansion or alteration is consistent with a role in longevity, and consistency is not proof. Demonstrating that a particular genetic feature actually causes the shark's extended lifespan, rather than merely correlating with it, requires functional studies that test the genes directly, and such studies remain to be done. The researchers themselves have been explicit on this point, noting that the connections they propose between specific genes and the shark's longevity are hypotheses awaiting confirmation. The genome offers strong candidates and plausible mechanisms. It does not yet establish the cause. It is a significant advance, and it is an advance in the framing of the question rather than a final answer to it. That measured conclusion is characteristic of the whole subject of the Greenland shark's longevity. The lifespan is established, the delayed maturity is established, the expectation of powerful cancer-suppressing and repair mechanisms is well-grounded, and the genome has now provided candidate mechanisms consistent with that expectation. But the full explanation of how a vertebrate lives for 5 centuries remains, at present, incomplete, a set of strong hypotheses, rather than a closed account. The animal that has lived longer than any other with a backbone still holds the secret of how it does so largely in reserve, and it holds in reserve, still more completely, the details of how it produces the next generation, a matter on which, remarkably, some of the most basic facts have never been observed at all. For an animal that has been known to science for over 2 centuries and hunted by people for far longer, the Greenland shark's reproduction is astonishingly poorly documented. Some of the most basic facts of how it produces its young, facts that are routine knowledge for common animals, have never been directly observed in the Greenland shark and remain matters of estimate and inference. No one has witnessed Greenland sharks mating. The gestation period is not known with any certainty. Even the number of young a female produces is genuinely disputed. The animal that lives longer than any other vertebrate carries out the fundamental business of reproduction almost entirely out of sight. What is known has been assembled largely from the examination of captured or bycaught females. The Greenland shark is ovoviviparous, more precisely, aplacentally viviparous, meaning that its embryos develop inside the mother, nourished by yolk rather than through a placental connection, and are born as live, independent young rather than laid as eggs. This much was established in the 20th century, when females were found to retain developing embryos internally rather than depositing eggs. The pups are born at a length of around 35 to 45 centimeters, already miniature versions of the adult, and are independent from birth. Beyond these facts, uncertainty takes over. The gestation period has been estimated at somewhere between 8 and 18 years, a span that, if correct, would be among the longest of any vertebrate, but which rests on estimate rather than observation. The litter size is contested to a striking degree. A traditional figure, based on the occasional discovery of a gravid female, places it at around 10 pups, while a more recent analysis of ovarian data and comparison with related sharks has estimated that a single pregnancy might produce as many as 200 to 300, a range so wide that it reflects, more than anything, how little is actually known. Even the location of the shark's early life is largely a mystery. Very small juveniles and newborns are almost never encountered. The specimens available to science are overwhelmingly larger, older animals, and the smallest size classes are represented by only a handful of records. This near absence of newborns has itself become a clue. A study examining the distribution of Greenland sharks across the northern North Atlantic identified a rare cluster of neonate and small juvenile specimens along the mid-Atlantic ridge and in the Erminger Sea, and interpreted this as evidence of a possible pupping ground in that region, one of the first indications of where the species may actually give birth. That the location of a large shark's nursery should be a recent and tentative discovery is a measure of how much of its life history remains hidden. The obscurity of the Greenland shark's reproduction is not merely a gap in knowledge. It has practical consequences, because reproduction is precisely the aspect of the animal's biology most relevant to whether its populations can withstand human pressure. An animal whose breeding is this poorly understood is an animal whose capacity to recover from decline cannot be confidently assessed. What is known, however, points uniformly in one direction: extremely slow. Late maturity, long gestation, and infrequent reproduction combine to make the Greenland shark one of the slowest reproducing animals in the ocean, a fact whose significance becomes acute when the account reaches the history of the shark's exploitation. First, though, the account turns to a discovery that has expanded the known world of the Greenland shark far beyond the Arctic ice with which it is associated. The Greenland shark is imagined, understandably, as a creature of the Arctic, an animal of ice and freezing northern water, confined to the high latitudes of the North Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean. For much of the history of its study, this was the assumed extent of its range, and it shaped the understanding of the species as a narrowly northern animal. That picture has been substantially revised, and the revision turns on a simple physical fact about the ocean. The deep sea is cold everywhere, including beneath warm surface waters far to the south. The Greenland shark is adapted to cold water, not to the Arctic as such, and cold water is available at depth throughout the world's oceans. Records of the species, and of animals closely resembling it, have accordingly extended far south of the Arctic into the deep, cold water off the coasts of the North Atlantic's temperate latitudes, and, in rarer and more surprising cases, into deep water at much lower latitudes still, including reported occurrences in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. In these southern locations, the shark is not found in the warm surface layer but far below it, in the cold, deep water that persists beneath the warmth. The implication is that the Greenland shark may use the uniformly cold, deep ocean as a corridor, ranging across vast distances at depth, its distribution governed by temperature rather than by latitude. An animal recorded in the deep water of the Caribbean and an animal beneath the Arctic ice may inhabit, in the terms that matter to the shark, the same cold environment. This expanded picture requires an important qualification, and the honest account includes it. Some of the records that extend the Greenland shark's range to the south are uncertain, and genetic evidence has introduced a note of caution. The Greenland shark and the Pacific sleeper shark are closely related and difficult to distinguish, and there is evidence of hybridization between them. Some of the animals recorded at the margins of the Greenland shark's supposed range may be Pacific sleeper sharks, hybrids, or animals whose identity cannot be securely established from the available evidence. The full extent of the Greenland shark's range and the degree to which it truly wanders the deep ocean of the world is therefore not settled. What can be said is that the species is far less confined to the Arctic than was once assumed, that the cold deep provides it with far more potential habitat than its northern reputation suggests, and that the boundaries of its world remain, like so much else about it, incompletely drawn. There is a further and stranger dimension to the Greenland shark's wandering, one that concerns not where it goes but what its journeys can mean to it. An animal that is effectively blind, moving through the uniform cold and darkness of the deep, has no visual access to its location and no way of registering where in the world it is. To such an animal, the deep water of the Arctic and the deep water of the Caribbean present the same undifferentiated environment, cold, dark, and featureless. A Greenland shark that has traveled thousands of kilometers has, in a real sense, experienced no change of scene, because there was no scene to change. This observation leads to one of the more speculative questions the animal raises, a question not about its body or its behavior, but about what, if anything, its long, slow, sightless existence is like from the inside. The Greenland shark's inventivity and extreme slowness together invite a question that lies at the edge of what science can address. Whether the passage of time is, in some sense, different for an animal that lives so slowly and so long. The question is speculative, and it must be treated as such. But it is grounded in a real and measurable feature of the animal's biology, the very low rate at which everything in its body proceeds. The starting point is a documented association between metabolic rate and the tempo of an animal's nervous processing. Small animals with very high metabolic rates, a fly, a hummingbird, process sensory information extremely quickly, and there is evidence that they perceive rapid events that a slower animal would miss, effectively experiencing the world at a finer temporal resolution. The Greenland shark sits at the opposite extreme. Its metabolism is among the lowest of any large animal. Its heart beats very slowly, and every process in its body proceeds at the reduced pace that near-freezing water imposes. If the tempo of an animal's internal processing shapes its experience of time, then an animal whose internal tempo is as slow as the Greenland shark's might, in principle, experience the passage of time very differently from a fast-living animal its centuries, perhaps not registering, from the inside, as the immense spans they represent in human terms. This is a genuinely uncertain area, and the limits of what can be claimed must be respected. The relationship between metabolic rate and subjective experience is not a simple or fully established one, and it cannot be assumed that a slow metabolism translates directly into a slow experience of time. The inference from processing speed to felt duration involves assumptions that are difficult to test in any animal, and especially in one as inaccessible as the Greenland shark. Moreover, the Greenland shark's brain is small relative to its body, and its neural life is not comparable to that of the more complex-brained animals in which such questions are usually raised. Whether the Greenland shark has anything that could be called an experience of duration at all is not a question science can currently answer. The most that can responsibly be said is that its biology runs at a tempo so far removed from that of fast-living animals that any experience it does have is likely to be correspondingly unlike theirs. What can be stated without speculation is the objective fact, which is remarkable enough on its own. A single Greenland shark moves through its centuries at a pace almost imperceptibly slow, in an environment that scarcely changes, with senses that register little of the world beyond the chemical traces it follows to its food. Across 300 or 400 or 500 years, it grows a centimeter at a time, crosses oceans without any visual record of having done so, and reaches adulthood only after a century and a half. Whatever such an existence is like from within, and the honest answer is that it may be like nothing that can be meaningfully compared to human experience, it is, viewed from outside, one of the slowest and longest lives on Earth. The animal that lives it has also been, for as long as people have known it, an object of human use, and the history of that use is the next part of the account. The Greenland shark's long entanglement with human beings extends well beyond the fermented flesh of Hackarl and for a period it was the object of a substantial commercial fishery, one that has since been largely forgotten, but that killed the animals in great numbers. The prize was not the toxic flesh, but the liver. Like many sharks, the Greenland shark has a very large, oil-rich liver, and that oil was a valuable commodity in the era before petroleum-based and synthetic substitutes became available. Shark liver oil was used for lighting, for lubrication, and in various industrial applications, and the Greenland shark, large and abundant in accessible northern waters, was a productive source of it. The fishery operated across the North Atlantic, in Norway, Iceland, and Greenland in particular, and at its height it took the sharks in very large numbers. Historical accounts record catches that, in peak years, ran to the tens of thousands of animals annually, with figures cited as high as more than 30,000 sharks taken in a single year. Verify. The scale reflected both the demand for the oil and the ease of catching the shark. A slow, unwary, bottom-dwelling animal drawn readily to bait is not difficult to catch in quantity, and the Greenland shark was harvested accordingly. For a period spanning the 19th and into the 20th century, this liver oil fishery represented a significant and sustained source of mortality for the species. The fishery declined and effectively ended in the middle of the 20th century, undone not by conservation concern but by economic obsolescence. The development of synthetic oils and other petroleum-based products removed the market for shark liver oil, and the export of liver oil and shark skin from Greenland ceased in the 1960s. The commercial motive for hunting the Greenland shark disappeared, and the large directed fishery ended with it. In one instance, the relationship briefly reversed. In the 1970s, the species came to be regarded in parts of western Norway as a nuisance to other fisheries, and a subsidized effort was made to reduce its numbers hunting the shark. Not for profit, but to be rid of it. But the era of large-scale directed exploitation was, by then, essentially over. The end of the directed fishery did not, however, end the killing of Greenland sharks, and the mortality that continues today comes from a less deliberate but no less consequential source. The animals are caught, in substantial numbers, as bycatch taken unintentionally in fisheries directed at other species, hooked or netted by gear not meant for them and killed in the process. This ongoing incidental mortality, set against the shark's extraordinarily slow reproduction, defines the conservation problem that the species now faces. And it is a problem whose severity follows directly from the very features, the long life, the late maturity, the slow breeding that make the Greenland shark so remarkable in the first place. The conservation situation of the Greenland shark is shaped by a single, decisive mismatch between the tempo of the animal's life and the tempo of the pressures now acting upon it. Every feature of the shark's biology that this account has described, the century-and-a-half approach to maturity, the gestation possibly measured in many years, the slow growth and infrequent reproduction combines to make the species one of the slowest reproducing large animals in the sea. And an animal that reproduces that slowly is an animal that cannot recover quickly from losses, because the fundamental process by which a population rebuilds itself, the production of a new generation, operates in the Greenland shark across timescales longer than a human life. The consequence is that even a moderate level of ongoing mortality can outpace the species' capacity to replace itself. The principal source of that mortality today is bycatch. The Greenland shark is taken incidentally in fisheries across the Arctic and North Atlantic, with estimates on the order of several thousand animals killed annually as bycatch in industrial fisheries, alongside a small directed artisanal catch that supplies the traditional Icelandic market. Verify. Each animal killed represents not merely an individual but a disproportionate loss, because an adult Greenland shark may be well over a century old and may have only recently become capable of reproducing, or not yet reached that point at all. To kill a mature Greenland shark is to end a life that began in a previous century, and to remove from the population a breeding animal that the species cannot readily replace. The reproductive value of each individual is extraordinarily high, precisely because each takes so long to produce. The formal recognition of this vulnerability has tightened over recent years. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, which assesses the conservation status of species, listed the Greenland shark as near threatened in the mid-2000s, and subsequently, in 2020, revised that assessment to vulnerable, reflecting concern over the combination of bycatch mortality and the species' inability to sustain it. The revision is a formal acknowledgement that an animal which survived for millions of years, and whose individuals survived for centuries, may nonetheless be at risk from human activity, not because that activity is intense by the standards applied to faster breeding species, but because the Greenland shark's reproduction is so slow that it can absorb almost no additional mortality without decline. There is a further pressure gathering tied to the warming of the shark's environment. As the Arctic warms and its sea ice diminishes, waters that were formerly inaccessible to fishing become open to it, potentially extending the reach of the fisheries that take the shark as bycatch into regions where it was previously protected by ice. The same warming may alter the cold water habitat to which the species is so precisely adapted. For an animal that has depended on the stability and inaccessibility of the cold Arctic deep, the opening and warming of that environment represents a novel and uncertain threat. Added to the bycatch mortality it is already ill-equipped to withstand. The Greenland shark's predicament is, in the end, the reverse face of its most remarkable quality. The slow, long life that allows it to persist for centuries is the same slow, long life that leaves it unable to recover if too many of its number are lost too quickly. The Greenland shark has shared the northern waters with human beings for as long as people have lived along their shores, and it occupies a place in the cultures of those peoples that reflects the strangeness of the animal itself. Long before the shark was a subject of scientific study, before its age was measured or its genome read, it was known to the peoples of the Arctic and the North Atlantic as a presence in their waters, and, in some traditions, as a figure in their stories. Among the Inuit of Greenland, the shark appears in traditional legend, and the stories told of it register the same features that strike modern observers. Its association with the cold, deep, and the distinctive ammonia-like quality connected to its flesh. One traditional account concerns the origin of the first Greenland shark, tracing the animal to an episode involving a cloth used in the washing of hair and carried into the sea, from which the shark is said to have arisen a story that connects the animal, in its telling, to the sharp ammoniac smell that its flesh in fact possesses. Verify. The details of such legends vary in their recorded forms, but their existence marks the shark as an animal woven into the traditional understanding of the Northern Sea, given an origin and a place in the order of the world by the people who shared its waters. That the smell which figures in the legend has, in the modern account, a specific chemical explanation, the urea and trimethylamine of the shark's cold-adapted flesh, is a small illustration of how traditional and scientific knowledge can converge on the same striking feature of an animal from different directions. The uses to which the shark was put reflect a practical relationship alongside the mythological one. Beyond the liver oil that drove the commercial fishery and the fermented flesh of hackarl, the Greenland shark supplied other materials to the peoples of the north. Its rough skin could be used as a form of shagreen, and its various parts were incorporated into the material culture of communities that wasted little of any large animal they could take. The relationship was one of long familiarity, an animal known, used, and storied over centuries of shared occupation of the same cold waters, part of the fabric of northern life, long before it became an object of scientific fascination. The modern understanding of the Greenland shark has, in a sense, restored a dimension of wonder that the long practical familiarity might have worn away. An animal that was, for the peoples who hunted it, a large and useful, if unglamorous inhabitant of the Northern Sea has turned out, under scientific examination, to be among the most extraordinary vertebrates on the planet, the longest lived, one of the slowest, an animal whose individuals may predate the nations now studying them. The shark that appears in the old legends and the shark that appears in the recent scientific literature are the same animal, and the convergence of the two accounts, the traditional and the modern, on a single strange and ancient creature is part of what makes the Greenland shark so compelling a subject. What remains is to consider the animal whole, to gather the disparate strands of its biology into a single picture, and to ask what an animal so far outside the ordinary run of life finally represents. The recurring theme of this account, that so much about the Greenland shark remains unknown, has a straightforward cause, and it is worth examining directly because it explains why an animal of such size and such interest should still hold so many secrets. The Greenland shark is exceptionally difficult to study. It lives in cold, deep, often ice-covered water, in remote regions far from the centers of scientific work, at depths and in conditions that make direct observation extremely hard to achieve. For most of the history of its study, the animal could be examined only when it was brought to the surface, usually dead, and the picture of its life assembled from such specimens is necessarily fragmentary. The great majority of what is known has come from captured animals, sharks taken deliberately in the historical fishery, or, more recently, hauled up as bycatch in fisheries directed at other species. From these specimens, examined on deck or in the laboratory, Researchers have reconstructed the shark's diet from its stomach contents, its reproductive biology from the state of captured females, its age from the tissue of its eyes, and its genetics from tissue samples. But a dead specimen reveals only so much. It cannot show how the animal behaves, how it hunts, how it moves through its environment, or how it interacts with others of its kind. Those aspects of the shark's life must be inferred, and the inferences remain uncertain precisely because the direct observations that would confirm them are so hard to obtain. The account of how the Greenland shark hunts a seal, for instance, rests entirely on inference from stomach contents and swimming speed, because no such hunt has been witnessed. Recent decades have brought new methods that begin to reach the living animal. Electronic tagging attaching to a shark, a device that records its depth, the temperature of the water around it, and its movements, and either stores the data for later recovery or transmits it, has allowed researchers to follow individual Greenland sharks through their environment without killing them, building a picture of where they go, how deep they descend, and what conditions they seek. Dedicated research expeditions, including those led by the biologist Julius Nielsen and colleagues whose work established the shark's age, have gone to the waters of Greenland and the wider North Atlantic, specifically to capture, sample, tag, and release these animals, gathering data from living sharks and returning them to the sea. Such work has begun to fill the gaps, but slowly and against considerable difficulty. The Greenland shark yields its information grudgingly, one hard-won observation at a time. The result is an animal known in an unusual pattern established, now in some of its most extraordinary attributes, while remaining obscure in some of its most basic ones. Its record-setting lifespan has been measured. The location of its nursery is barely known. Its genome has been sequenced. Its mating has never been seen. This uneven distribution of knowledge, with the exotic established and the ordinary still hidden, is a direct consequence of the difficulty of studying the animal, and it is a reminder that the Greenland shark remains, for all the recent advances, one of the least known large animals in the ocean. What is known of it is the product of persistent effort against a genuinely inaccessible subject, and much of its life is still, in the fullest sense, undiscovered. Despite its slowness, its blindness, and its unhurried manner, the Greenland shark occupies the position of an apex predator in its ecosystem, the animal at or near the top of the food web, preyed upon by essentially nothing. This is an unusual station for so sluggish an animal, and it results from the particular conditions of the cold, deep environment the shark inhabits, where the qualities that would disadvantage a predator in a warmer, faster world are no impediment, and where the shark's size and chemistry protect it from being preyed upon in turn. The evidence that the Greenland shark feeds at a high trophic level is firm. Stable isotope analysis of its tissues, which reveals the long-term position of an animal in the food web, places larger Greenland sharks near the top, consistent with a diet that includes fish and marine mammals of substantial size. As the shark grows, its diet shifts toward higher trophic prey, so that the largest individuals are genuine top predators, taking seals and large fish. In the Arctic and deep North Atlantic ecosystems it inhabits, the Greenland shark is among the largest predatory animals present, and within the cold deep it has few, if any, rivals for the position. Its role there is a combination of predator and scavenger, hunting live prey where it can, and consuming the dead where it finds them, a flexible, opportunistic occupancy of the top of the food web. What the Greenland shark does not have, in any meaningful sense, is predators of its own. An adult of 5 meters or more is too large for most animals to attack, and its flesh, saturated with the compounds that make it toxic, offers a further deterrent to anything that might try. The one animal sometimes cited as a possible predator is the orca, large and capable enough to attack a Greenland shark. But an orca, an intelligent animal, has good reason to avoid consuming flesh loaded with the toxins the Greenland shark carries, and predation on adult Greenland sharks is at most rare. For practical purposes, the adult Greenland shark sits at the top of its food web unthreatened by other animals, its position secured not by speed or ferocity but by size, by the cold that excludes competitors, and by the chemistry that makes it an unpalatable meal. The Greenland shark thus demonstrates that dominance in an ecosystem need not take the form associated with the fast, powerful predators of warmer or shallower waters. In the cold deep, an apex predator can be slow, blind, and unhurried, ruling its environment, not by pursuit and power, but by endurance, patience, and the peculiar advantages of a body built for cold. It is an apex predator on its own terms, suited exactly to the environment it occupies, an environment whose character, so central to everything about the shark, deserves examination in its own right. The Greenland shark cannot be understood apart from the environment that has shaped it, and that environment, the cold, deep water of the Arctic and the North Atlantic, is among the most distinctive on the planet. It is a world defined by cold, by darkness, and above all by stability, and each of these qualities has left its mark on the animal that inhabits it. To describe the Arctic deep is, in effect, to describe the conditions that produced the Greenland shark's slowness, its longevity, and its whole manner of life. The defining quality is cold. The deep water of the Arctic and the northern North Atlantic holds close to freezing, and in the high Arctic, even the surface water is frigid, so that the Greenland shark, uniquely among large sharks, can occur near the surface as well as at depth, wherever the water is cold enough to suit it. Across its range, the shark occupies a band of temperature only a few degrees wide, from around the freezing point of seawater to a modest handful of degrees above it, and it is this narrow, cold range that sets the tempo of its biology. The second quality is darkness. Much of the shark's range lies deep enough to be dark, and even the shallower Arctic waters it frequents are dimmed by ice cover and by the low angle of the polar sun, so that the shark inhabits a world where vision is of limited use, and other senses dominate the condition that renders its parasite-induced blindness so nearly irrelevant. The third and most consequential quality is stability. The deep Arctic and North Atlantic constitute an environment that changes very little over long spans of time. Below the influence of the seasons and the surface weather, temperature and conditions hold steady across years, centuries, and longer, and this constancy is the environmental counterpart of the shark's own slow, long, unchanging life. An animal that lives for centuries requires an environment stable enough to support so long a life, and the Arctic deep provides exactly that, a world of such constancy that a shark born in 1 century may pass through several more without encountering any fundamental change in the conditions around it. The stability of the environment and the longevity of the animal are matched, each making sense of the other. This is the world to which the Greenland shark is adapted with such completeness, and it is a world now beginning to change. The stability that has characterized the Arctic for so long is precisely what the warming of the polar regions threatens, and an animal so exactly fitted to a constant, cold, dark environment is an animal for which change of any kind is a hazard. The Greenland shark is the product of an old and stable world, and its predicament, as that world alters, is the predicament of everything so precisely adapted to conditions that are ceasing to hold. Understanding the shark fully means recognizing it as the creation of a particular environment, and recognizing, too, that the animal and the environment are bound together, the one unintelligible without the other. Living permanently in water near the point of freezing is a demanding condition, and the Greenland shark's persistence in it depends on a suite of physiological adaptations that allow its body to function where the chemistry of life would otherwise falter. The cold is not merely a matter of slowing the animal down. At the temperatures the Greenland shark inhabits, the fundamental processes of the body, the folding of proteins, the transport of oxygen, the maintenance of fluid balance face specific difficulties that the shark has evolved to overcome. The most important adaptations return, once again, to the compounds that recur throughout the shark's biology: urea and trimethylamine, N-oxide. Beyond their roles in osmoregulation and buoyancy, and beyond making the flesh toxic to would-be consumers, these compounds serve a protective function within the shark's own cells. High pressure and, in related ways, the stresses of the deep cold environment tend to destabilize proteins, interfering with the precise three-dimensional shapes on which their function depends. TMAO counteracts this tendency, acting as a chemical stabilizer that helps the shark's proteins hold their proper form and continue working under conditions that would impair them. The same molecule that poisons anything that eats the shark is, within the living animal, part of what keeps its cellular machinery operating in the cold deep. The high concentration of TMAO in the Greenland shark is thus not incidental but central to its ability to live where it does. Other adaptations address the specific challenge of supplying oxygen to a cold body in cold water. The Greenland shark has been found to possess multiple distinct forms of hemoglobin, the molecule that carries oxygen in the blood, an arrangement that may allow it to transport oxygen effectively across the range of conditions it encounters at different depths and temperatures. Combined with its very low metabolic rate, which reduces the total demand for oxygen. This helps ensure that the shark's tissues are supplied even in an environment where the animal's own cold slows every process. The low metabolic rate is itself an adaptation as much as a consequence. By living slowly, the shark reduces its energetic and respiratory demands to a level it can meet from the scarce resources of its cold, food-poor habitat. The overall effect is an animal whose every physiological system is tuned to the cold, so thoroughly that the conditions which would incapacitate most large fish are, for the Greenland shark, simply the conditions of ordinary life. It does not endure the cold. It is built from it, adapted at the level of its proteins and its blood, and its metabolism to a world near freezing. This completeness of adaptation is the foundation of everything else about the animal, its slowness, its longevity, its whole manner of existence, and it is also the source of its vulnerability, for an animal so precisely fitted to the cold has nowhere to go, should the cold itself begin to fail. The adaptations that let the Greenland shark master its environment are the same ones that bind it to an environment now under threat. The Greenland shark's eyes, so central to the story of the parasite that clouds them, deserve consideration in their own right, because the relationship between the shark and its vision is more nuanced than the simple statement that the animal is blind. The eyes are, after all, present and before the parasite does its work functional, and their fate over the animal's long life illustrates the peculiar way the Greenland shark's biology fits together. Greenland sharks are not born blind. Their eyes develop normally and, in the young animal, presumably function as eyes do, providing whatever vision is useful in the dim environment the shark inhabits. It is only over the course of the animal's life that vision is lost, as the parasitic copepod attaches to the cornea and over years degrades it. This is an unusual pattern. In many deep-sea animals that do not rely on sight, the eyes are reduced or lost over evolutionary time, becoming vestigial across generations as vision ceases to be useful. The Greenland shark has not taken this path. It retains fully formed, functional eyes, which are then disabled anew in each individual by the parasite, rather than being dispensed with by the species as a whole. The shark keeps building working eyes that are then clouded over within its own lifetime. Why the species should retain functional eyes it so reliably loses to parasitism is an open question, and it points to the possibility that vision retains some value in the young shark, or at some depths or moments, sufficient to preserve the eye's development even though the adult will lose it. A recent and intriguing observation from the genetic study of the shark bears on the eye from another direction. The genome analysis noted DNA repair, associated genes active in the retina, which researchers suggested might help preserve the retinal tissue over the animal's long life. The suggestion, advanced cautiously, and requiring confirmation, is that the shark may possess mechanisms to protect its eyes against the accumulated damage of centuries, even as the external parasite degrades the cornea. If so, the animal maintains, at the level of the retina, a capacity for visual function that the parasite defeats at the level of the cornea and internal preservation working against an external destruction. Whatever the resolution of these questions, the practical outcome for the adult shark is the one already described. A predator that hunts effectively without relying on sight, guided by smell and its other senses through a world in which vision would in any case be of limited use. The eye of the Greenland shark stands as a small emblem of the animal's larger character, a structure retained and maintained with evident care by the species, yet reliably ruined in the individual, its loss compensated so completely by other faculties that it scarcely matters. Like so much about the Greenland shark, the eye rewards close attention with a puzzle, and the puzzle, on examination, opens onto the animal's deeper strangeness, rather than resolving into anything simple. Across the many facets of the Greenland shark examined in this account, a single quality recurs so consistently that it may be regarded as the organizing principle of the entire animal: slowness. It is not that the Greenland shark happens to be slow in one respect or another. Slowness pervades every system of its body and every stage of its life, to a degree that makes it perhaps the slowest living large animal on the planet. Gathering these threads together reveals how completely the animal is defined by the reduced tempo at which everything about it proceeds. The slowness begins with movement. The Greenland shark swims more slowly, relative to its size, than any other fish, at a pace of around 1 kilometer per hour, with the lowest tail beat frequency recorded for a fish of its dimensions. It extends to growth. The animal adds perhaps a centimeter of length in a year, accumulating its 5 or 6 meters over a span that ordinary growth rates could never produce. It governs the heartbeat and the metabolism, both among the lowest known for a large animal, set by the near-freezing water in which the shark lives. It shapes the timing of the life cycle, delaying maturity to an age of around 150 years. And, if the estimates hold, stretching gestation across many years, and it culminates in the lifespan itself, extending the whole of the animal's existence across centuries, the slowest possible expression of a life, drawn out to a length no other vertebrate attains. These are not independent facts, but a single condition expressed in many forms. The cold of the shark's environment slows its metabolism. The slow metabolism slows its growth, its heartbeat, and every internal process. The slow growth delays its maturity. The whole slow-running biology extends its lifespan. Each element follows from the others, and all follow from the fundamental fact of a body running at the reduced pace that near-freezing water permits. The Greenland shark is not an animal with several slow features, but an animal whose every feature is a facet of a single, thoroughgoing slowness, a creature that does everything, from swimming to reproducing to living, more slowly than almost anything else alive. Understood this way, the Greenland shark's most famous attribute, its longevity, ceases to be an isolated marvel and becomes the natural terminus of a coherent design. An animal built to live this slowly will, if nothing kills it, live this long. The centuries are the arithmetic of a life conducted at so reduced a pace. The lifespan is not a separate wonder appended to an otherwise ordinary shark, but the sum of the slowness that runs through the whole animal, the final, longest expression of a life lived slower than any other. This coherence is part of what makes the Greenland shark so satisfying a subject. Its many strange features are not a collection of unrelated oddities, but the varied surface of a single deep principle, and to understand its slowness is to understand, in one stroke, nearly everything about it. The behavior of the Greenland shark, in the rare instances where it has been observed, is as distinctive as its physiology, and it completes the portrait of an animal defined by the absence of haste. Encounters with living Greenland sharks by divers, by researchers, and through the cameras lowered into their habitat describe a creature that moves through its world with a deliberateness bordering on indifference, showing none of the quick reactivity associated with other large sharks. The impression these encounters convey is not of a fierce predator, but of a slow, heavy, unhurried animal going about its existence at its own reduced pace. This demeanor is consistent with the animal's biology. A shark with the lowest metabolic rate and slowest movement of any of its size is not built for rapid responses, and its behavior reflects the same economy that governs its body. Greenland sharks observed around bait can be persistent and bold, approaching food with a slow determination and feeding without evident wariness. But they are not quick, and they show little of the darting reactivity of faster sharks. Toward human beings, they are, by all accounts, essentially indifferent. The Greenland shark is not considered a danger to people, not because it is small or weak, it is neither, but because it is too slow and too unreactive to pose the kind of threat that faster sharks can. And because human beings are not part of the world it is attuned to. Encounters between people and Greenland sharks are rare in any case, given the remote and inaccessible waters the animal inhabits, and those that occur describe a creature more curious or oblivious than aggressive. There is a coherence between this behavior and the shark's sensory life that is worth drawing out. An animal that perceives its world primarily through smell, that is largely blind, and that moves and reacts slowly is an animal whose engagement with its surroundings is of a fundamentally different character from that of a fast, sharp-sighted predator. It does not scan its environment visually, does not react quickly to sudden events, and does not pursue. It follows scent, approaches slowly, and feeds when it reaches food. Its behavior is not a diminished version of a normal shark's behavior, but a different mode of existence altogether, suited to a slow animal in a dark, cold, stable world where nothing needs to be done quickly and little rewards haste. This behavioral portrait, assembled from limited observations, reinforces the picture the rest of the account has developed. The Greenland shark is not a conventional predator, rendered slow and blind by circumstance, struggling to do what other sharks do under a handicap. It is an animal wholly organized around a different way of living, slow, olfactory, unhurried, indifferent, and its behavior is the outward expression of that organization. To watch a Greenland shark, in the rare event that one can be watched, is to see slowness made into a way of being, an animal that has made its entire existence out of the absence of urgency. Although the Greenland shark moves slowly, it does not stay in one place, and the picture of its movements built up in recent years through electronic tagging reveals an animal that ranges widely through the water column and across its cold habitat, governed in its wanderings by the conditions it seeks rather than by any fixed territory. The slowness of its swimming does not confine it. Over the long spans of its life, An animal moving at even a kilometer an hour can cover enormous distances, and the Greenland shark appears to do exactly that. Tagging studies, which record the depth and temperature experienced by individual sharks over time, have shown that the Greenland shark moves through a considerable range of depths, from near the surface in the coldest parts of its range down to well over 1,000 meters, and in some records considerably deeper. These vertical movements appear to track the temperature the shark prefers. Rather than remaining at a fixed depth, the animal adjusts its position in the water column to stay within the narrow band of cold water to which it is adapted, moving shallower where the surface is cold enough, and descending where warmth at the surface drives the cold water down. The shark's distribution, in 3 dimensions, is organized around temperature, and its movements are, in large part, a continual seeking of the cold. This temperature-governed movement underlies the expanded picture of the shark's range discussed earlier. Because the cold water the shark requires is found at the surface in the high Arctic but only at depth further south, a Greenland shark ranging into lower latitudes must descend to find suitable conditions, and the same animal that swims in shallow water beneath the Arctic ice may occupy deep water far to the south. The tagging data, showing individuals moving through wide ranges of depth and temperature, are consistent with an animal capable of traversing large distances by following the cold using the deep, uniformly cold layer of the ocean as a corridor through which it can move between regions that share nothing but their temperature. The Greenland shark's world is defined not by a place but by a condition, and it moves through the ocean in pursuit of that condition wherever it leads. The image that results is of an animal both slow and far-ranging, a combination that seems contradictory only until the timescale of the shark's life is taken into account. Over a life of centuries, an animal need not be fast to travel far. It need only keep moving, slowly, for a very long time. The Greenland shark, drifting through the cold deep at its unhurried pace across 300 or 400 years, may cover distances and cross regions that no faster but shorter-lived animal could match, precisely because it has so much time in which to do so. Its slowness and its wide range are not in tension but in partnership, the one made possible by the extraordinary length of the life across which it operates. The Greenland shark is the most studied and most famous of its kind, but it is not alone. It is the best known member of a lineage of cold water sharks distributed through the frigid waters of the world, and placing it among its relatives helps clarify both what it shares with them and what makes it distinctive. The sleeper sharks of the genus Somniosus and the wider family to which they belong form a group adapted to cold and depth wherever those conditions occur, and their distribution traces the cold waters of the planet from pole to pole. The Greenland shark's closest counterpart is the Pacific sleeper shark, Somniosus pacificus, an animal of the cold North Pacific that closely resembles it in form, size, and habits. The two are so alike that distinguishing them can be difficult, and the resemblance is not merely superficial. The Pacific sleeper shark shares the Greenland shark's slow, cold-adapted way of life, its scavenging and predatory habits, and even its affliction by the same eye parasite, Omatocoeta elongata, which has been recorded on Pacific sleeper sharks as well. In the cold waters of the southern hemisphere, around the sub-Antarctic, a third species, the southern sleeper shark, Somniosus antarcticus, occupies a similar role. Together, these sharks constitute a lineage that has colonized the cold, deep waters of both hemispheres, filling in each the niche of the large, slow, cold-adapted predator and scavenger. The close relationship among these species has a consequence that has already been noted, and that complicates the study of the Greenland shark specifically. The boundaries between them are not always sharp, and there is evidence of hybridization, particularly between the Greenland shark and the Pacific sleeper shark, where the ranges of closely related species meet, or where individuals wander into overlapping territory. Interbreeding can occur, producing animals of mixed ancestry that are difficult to assign to one species or the other. This is part of why some records at the margins of the Greenland shark's range are uncertain, and why the full extent of the species distribution remains unsettled. Some of the animals in question may be Pacific sleeper sharks or hybrids, rather than Greenland sharks proper. The genus, in this respect, behaves less like a set of sharply divided species than like a closely related complex of cold water forms, shading into one another where they meet. Viewed as a lineage, the sleeper sharks illustrate that the Greenland shark's remarkable qualities are not entirely unique, but are the extreme expression of a strategy shared across a group. The whole lineage is slow, cold-adapted, long-lived, and organized around the same economical way of life. The Greenland shark, living in the coldest and most stable waters, carries that strategy furthest, attaining the greatest size, the coldest habits, and the longest life. It is the culmination of a lineage-wide adaptation to cold and depth rather than a solitary anomaly, and its relatives, less studied but broadly similar, suggest that its extraordinary longevity may be a property of the whole sleeper shark group, rather than of the Greenland shark alone. What has been established in detail for the Greenland shark may, in outline, hold for its cold water kin across the oceans of the world. The Greenland shark entered the formal record of science more than 2 centuries ago, and the history of its scientific study is itself a long one, spanning the era in which the animals of the world were first systematically described and named. The species was formally described in 1801 by the naturalists Bloch and Schneider, who gave it the scientific name it still carries, Somniosus microcephalus, the sleeper. Small-headed, the name has proven apt across the 2 centuries since, capturing in 2 words the slowness and the small-headedness that later study would confirm as central to the animal. For most of the time since that first description, however, the Greenland shark remained an animal known in outline rather than in depth. The naturalists of the 19th century could describe its form, note its size and its cold water habitat, record the parasite on its eye, and observe the toxicity of its flesh. The parasite itself was described in 1827, early in the shark's scientific history. But the deeper questions, how long it lived, how it reproduced, how it hunted, lay beyond the reach of the methods then available, and the shark accumulated a reputation as a large, strange, slow inhabitant of the northern seas, without its most remarkable secrets being suspected. It was known, in this period, primarily through the fishery that hunted it and through the specimens that fishery produced, and the scientific picture of the animal was assembled from what could be observed of dead sharks brought up from the cold. The transformation of that picture belongs almost entirely to recent decades. The great facts for which the Greenland shark is now known its status as the longest-lived vertebrate, its century-and-a-half maturity, the details of its genome were all established in the present century, and mostly within the last decade. The animal described in 1801 was, for over 200 years, a large cold-water shark of no exceptional reputation. The animal known now is one of the most extraordinary vertebrates on the planet. The difference lies not in the shark, which is unchanged, but in the methods brought to bear on it, the radiocarbon dating that read its age from its eyes, the electronic tags that followed its movements, the genome sequencing that mapped its genetic code. The Greenland shark is an old subject of science made suddenly new, an animal known for 2 centuries that has yielded its most important secrets only in the last few years. This long and uneven history carries a lesson that runs through the whole account. The Greenland shark demonstrates how much can remain hidden, for how long, in an animal that is large, accessible in principle, and known to science for generations. Its most defining quality, a lifespan exceeding that of any other vertebrate, went unrecognized for over 200 years after the animal was named. Not because anyone doubted the shark was old, but because no one could measure how old until a method arrived that could. The history of the Greenland shark is a reminder that the familiar can conceal the extraordinary, and that even a long-known animal may prove, on the arrival of the right technique, to be far stranger than any of its describers imagined. Much of this account has concerned the Greenland shark as a predator, the puzzle of how so slow an animal catches live prey, but predation is only half of how the animal feeds, and the other half, scavenging, connects the shark to the wider economy of the deep and cold sea in ways worth examining directly. The Greenland shark is one of the great scavengers of the Northern Ocean, and its role in consuming the dead is as central to its way of life as its predation on the living. The scavenging is founded on the shark's exceptional sense of smell. An animal equipped to detect faint chemical traces across great distances is an animal well suited to locating carrion. The diffuse scent of a decaying carcass, spreading through the water, is exactly the kind of signal the Greenland shark's olfactory system is built to follow. Drawn by such scents, the shark travels to food falls of all kinds. The carcasses of marine mammals that sink to the seafloor, the remains of animals that have died and settled, and the concentrated food that a large dead body represents in an environment otherwise poor in food. The strange contents of Greenland shark stomachs, the reindeer, the horses, the polar bears, are records of this scavenging. Evidence of an animal that consumes whatever dead material enters its cold water from whatever source. In this role, the Greenland shark participates in one of the fundamental processes of the deep sea, the consumption and recycling of the dead. In an environment supplied largely by material sinking from above, the large scavengers perform the essential function of processing the carcasses that reach the bottom returning their substance to the ecosystem and preventing the accumulation of undecomposed material. The whale fall, the carcass of a great whale sunk to the seafloor, is the largest such windfall, and the Greenland shark, drawn by smell to concentrated food, is among the animals that exploit these rare bonanzas, feeding on the flesh of a fallen whale. Alongside the other scavengers such a carcass attracts. The shark's capacity to detect and travel to these scattered, unpredictable food sources and to consume large quantities when it reaches them is precisely the capacity that its slow, enduring, energy-storing body supports. The dual character of the Greenland shark predator and scavenger together is not a contradiction but a coherent strategy for the environment it inhabits. In a cold, food-poor sea where meals are scarce and hard-won, an animal that confined itself to hunting live prey or to scavenging the dead would forgo half of the available food. The Greenland shark does both, hunting where it can and scavenging where it must, an opportunist that takes whatever the cold sea offers. This flexibility is part of what allows it to persist in an environment of scarcity, and it places the shark firmly within the wider economy of the deep, not as a specialist of one mode of feeding, but as a generalist consumer of both the living and the dead, occupying the top of a food web that it helps, through its scavenging, to keep in balance. The threats to the Greenland shark, introduced earlier in the context of its slow reproduction, deserve fuller treatment, because they arise from a change now underway in the very environment that defines the animal, and because they illustrate with unusual clarity how an exquisitely adapted species can be endangered by the alteration of the conditions to which it is adapted. The Greenland shark is a creature of the cold, stable, ice-influenced waters of the Arctic and North Atlantic, and those waters are changing faster than almost any environment on the planet. The most direct change is warming. The polar regions are heating more rapidly than the global average, and the cold water to which the Greenland shark is adapted is warming with them. For an animal fitted so precisely to a narrow band of low temperature, an animal whose metabolism, movements, and distribution are all organized around staying within cold water, a general warming of its environment is a fundamental threat, potentially shrinking the range of suitable conditions and forcing the shark into deeper or more restricted waters. An animal so specialized for cold has limited capacity to adjust to a warming world, and the timescale of the warming, measured in decades, is far shorter than the timescale on which the Greenland shark's slow evolution could respond. Compounding the warming is the loss of sea ice, which threatens the shark in a more indirect but no less serious way. The Arctic ice has, in effect, shielded parts of the Greenland shark's habitat from human activity, rendering ice-covered waters inaccessible to the fisheries whose bycatch is the principal source of the shark's mortality. As the ice retreats, waters that were formerly protected become open to fishing, potentially extending the reach of the fisheries that kill Greenland sharks incidentally into regions where the animals were previously beyond human reach. The retreat of the ice thus does not merely alter the shark's physical environment. It removes a barrier that has limited human access to it, exposing populations that the ice had protected. An animal already unable to withstand much additional mortality because of its slow reproduction faces the prospect of increased mortality as its habitat opens to exploitation. The convergence of these pressures defines the Greenland shark's predicament, and it is a predicament that follows directly from the animal's most remarkable qualities. The slow reproduction that makes each individual so valuable and each loss so hard to replace is the product of the same slow, cold-adapted life that makes the shark extraordinary. The precise adaptation to cold that allows it to rule the frozen deep is the same adaptation that leaves it stranded as the cold recedes. The stability of the Arctic environment that permitted the evolution of a 5-century lifespan is the same stability now being lost. In every respect, the qualities that make the Greenland shark so singular are the qualities that render it vulnerable to a rapidly changing world, an animal built by and for a slow and constant environment, confronting change that is neither slow nor constant, and ill-equipped by its very nature to keep pace with it. An honest account of the Greenland shark must be as clear about the limits of what is known as about the discoveries themselves, because the animal is, even now, understood in a way that is unusually provisional. Many of the most striking statements made about it, statements repeated throughout this account and throughout the popular treatments of the species, rest on evidence that is partial, indirect, or hedged with uncertainty, and understanding the animal properly means understanding the character of the evidence on which its portrait is built. The famous lifespan is the firmest of the extraordinary claims, but even it is a matter of estimates with substantial margins. The radiocarbon dating that established the shark as the longest-lived vertebrate produces ages with wide uncertainties, so that the oldest individual studied is given not as a definite figure, but as a range, spanning more than 200 years. The conclusion that the species lives for centuries is secure. The precise age of any particular shark is not. Other claims rest on far thinner evidence. The gestation period, cited as somewhere between 8 and 18 years, is an estimate rather than an observation, since no one has followed a Greenland shark through pregnancy. The litter size is genuinely disputed, with figures ranging from around 10 to as many as several hundred, reflecting the near total absence of direct data. The manner in which the shark catches its fast-moving prey is an inference from stomach contents and swimming speed, not a witnessed behavior, and the genetic mechanisms proposed to explain the shark's longevity are, as the researchers themselves emphasize, hypotheses consistent with the evidence rather than demonstrated causes, awaiting the functional studies that would confirm them. This provisionality is not a weakness in the account so much as an honest feature of the subject, and it follows directly from the difficulty of studying the animal. The Greenland shark lives where it cannot easily be observed, reproduces where it has never been watched, and reveals itself mostly through the specimens that human fisheries happen to bring up. Knowledge assembled under such constraints is necessarily incomplete, built from indirect evidence and cautious inference, and marked throughout by the gaps that direct observation would fill if direct observation were possible. That the resulting picture is as detailed as it is testifies to the ingenuity of the methods brought to bear. That it remains so uncertain testifies to how much the animal still withholds. To hold the Greenland shark's portrait accurately in mind, then, is to hold it with the appropriate uncertainty to know that the shark lives for centuries while acknowledging that no single age is precisely fixed, to accept that it hunts seals while admitting that the hunt has never been seen, to credit the genetic hypotheses while remembering that they are not yet proven. This is not a diminished way of knowing the animal but a truthful one, and it is, in its way, fitting. An animal this strange, this slow, and this inaccessible is appropriately known in a manner that respects the limits of the evidence, established in its broad and remarkable outlines, uncertain in its details, and still, after 2 centuries of study, only partly revealed. The honest final word on many aspects of the Greenland shark is that they remain unknown, and that word is not a failure of the account but its integrity. To gather the facts of the Greenland shark's biology into a single image, it helps to trace the arc of one individual life from beginning to end, to follow a single shark, in imagination, through the centuries it may occupy, and to see how the separate features already described assemble into the course of a single existence. The result is a life unlike that of almost any other animal, drawn out across a span that no other vertebrate matches. The life begins, as far as the fragmentary evidence suggests, somewhere in the deep, cold water of the North Atlantic, possibly near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge or the Erminger Sea, where the rare cluster of newborns has hinted at a nursery. The shark is born alive, already a miniature of the adult, some 40 centimeters in length, independent from the moment of birth. From there it grows, at a rate of roughly a centimeter a year, through a juvenile period of extraordinary length. Through the decades of its early life, it is not yet capable of reproducing. It grows slowly, feeds, and survives, passing through a childhood that lasts not years but a century and a half. A shark born in the middle of the 19th century would, on this schedule, reach maturity only now, in the present era, its entire juvenile period longer than the lifespan of nearly every other animal in the sea. Having reached maturity at around 150 years, the shark enters an adult life that may extend across several further centuries. Through this vast span, it continues its slow existence, cruising the cold deep at 1 kilometer an hour, following scents to food, hunting sleeping seals and scavenging the fallen, moving through wide ranges of depth in pursuit of the cold water it requires, reproducing at intervals that remain unknown. Its eyes, functional in youth, cloud over as the parasite does its slow work, and the mature animal proceeds through its centuries effectively blind, guided by smell through a dark and unchanging world. It may cross oceans in the course of its long life, ranging from the Arctic ice into deep water far to the south, all without any visual record of the journey. And through all of it, the animal changes little, its slow biology holding it in a near constant state across spans of time that would see empires rise and fall in the world above. The life ends, when it ends, after a duration that beggars comparison. 3 centuries, 4, perhaps 5, the longest life of any animal with a backbone. Set out in full, The shape of that life is staggering. A 40-centimeter pup that grows a centimeter a year, matures after 150 years, lives for several hundred more, and dies as an animal that was born before the modern world took its current form. No summary of the shark's separate features conveys the strangeness of the whole as forcefully as this single traced arc, a life so long, so slow, and so constant that it turns the ordinary units of an animal's existence into the units of human history, and makes of a single fish a creature whose lifespan is measured against the ages of the world. The intense scientific interest in the Greenland shark's longevity is driven, in part, by a hope that reaches beyond the shark itself. The hope that understanding how an animal lives for centuries, largely free of the diseases of age, might illuminate the biology of aging in general, including in human beings. This hope is worth examining carefully because it is both a genuine motivation for the research and a source of claims that require restraint. The reasoning behind the hope is sound in outline. Aging and the diseases associated with it, cancer foremost among them, arise from processes that operate in all animals, including the accumulation of cellular damage, the failure of repair mechanisms, and the breakdown of the systems that maintain a healthy body. An animal that has evolved to resist these processes for centuries must possess mechanisms of maintenance and repair unusually effective by the standards of most vertebrates, and identifying those mechanisms might reveal something about how aging can be slowed or its diseases resisted. The Greenland shark, as the longest-lived vertebrate, is an extreme case of successful biological maintenance, and the genome studies that have identified its expanded families of repair and immune genes are, in part, an attempt to learn what that success consists of, in the hope that the lessons might eventually inform the understanding of human aging and disease. The necessary restraint concerns the distance between identifying a mechanism in a shark and applying any insight to human beings, which is very great. The genetic features found in the Greenland shark are associations awaiting functional confirmation, not established mechanisms. Even were they confirmed in the shark, the path from a shark's biology to a human therapy would be long, uncertain, and quite possibly impassable. An animal that achieves its longevity through the particular chemistry of a cold-adapted, slow-metabolizing body may have little to offer a warm-blooded, fast-living species whose biology differs in fundamental ways. The honest statement of the hope is modest, that studying extreme longevity in animals like the Greenland shark may contribute, over time and in combination with much other research, to the understanding of aging without any promise that it will yield treatments for human beings. The shark is a source of insight into how long life is possible in nature, not a key to extending human life. Held within these limits, the significance of the Greenland shark for the science of aging is real but bounded. It stands as a demonstration that a vertebrate body can be maintained, largely intact, across the better part of 5 centuries, a proof of possibility that expands the understanding of what biology can achieve. It offers, in its genome and its physiology, candidate mechanisms for that achievement to be tested and understood, and it serves as a natural experiment in the resistance to aging and cancer, alongside the other long-lived animals that science studies for the same reasons. What it does not offer is a shortcut or a promise, and the responsible account of what the shark's longevity might teach is careful to claim the genuine significance without the exaggeration that so often attaches to it. The Greenland shark is a window onto the biology of long life, valuable for what it reveals about the natural world, and studied in the reasonable hope, rather than the confident expectation, that what it reveals may one day prove more widely useful. There is a particular fascination in the thought that a Greenland shark alive today may have been alive through the whole span of recent human history, that a single animal now swimming in the cold Arctic water was already swimming there when events long since passed into history were still in the papeless, wide future. The fascination is legitimate, and it is worth dwelling on, provided it is held with the precision the facts require rather than allowed to drift into sentiment. The bare chronology is arresting enough on its own. A Greenland shark near the upper end of the estimated age range, born around the beginning of the 16th century, would have been alive through the entire modern era, through the voyages that mapped the world, the rise and fall of nations, the transformations of science and technology that remade human life, and the wars and upheavals that filled the centuries. A shark of the more central estimate, some 400 years old, would have been born in the early 17th century and would have lived through nearly all of it. Across the whole of that time, the animal would have done what Greenland sharks do: cruised the cold deep at its unhurried pace, followed scents to its food, grown a centimeter a year, and passed through the centuries in the near-constant conditions of the Arctic water. The events that define human history, unfolding in the world above, would have passed entirely unregistered by the shark below. That last point is where precision matters most, because it is tempting and misleading to cast the shark as a witness to history in any meaningful sense. It witnessed nothing, an animal effectively blind, moving through a dark and uniform environment, with a small brain organized around smell rather than memory or understanding, has no awareness of the events that coincided with its life, no record of them, no sense that time is passing at all in the way a human observer would understand. The shark that was alive during some distant historical event did not perceive it, does not remember it, and carries no trace of it beyond the radiocarbon incidentally laid down in the tissue of its eye. To call the Greenland shark a witness to history is a figure of speech, and a slightly false one. The shark is not a witness but a contemporary, an animal whose life happened to overlap with human events. It had no capacity to observe. What the shark actually offers is something more austere and, on reflection, more interesting than the romantic image of a witness. It is a living object of great antiquity, an animal whose individual existence spans a length of time that human beings experience only collectively, across many generations, and that no single person can live to see. The Greenland shark makes the scale of centuries concrete in a single living body, collapsing into one animal, a duration that human life can only approach through history and memory. It does not know the centuries it has lived through, but it has lived through them, and its unknowing endurance across so vast a span is a fact that reframes the human sense of time. The shark is not a witness to the ages, but a measure of them, a creature whose single life is long enough to hold the whole of the modern era, indifferent to all of it, and remarkable precisely because that indifference coexists with so extraordinary a length of days. Beyond the age of any individual shark lies a deeper antiquity, the antiquity of the kind of life the Greenland shark represents, and of the environment that produced it. The animal is not only old in its individual lifespan, it is the expression of an old and stable way of living, adapted to conditions that have persisted in the cold deep, across timescales far longer than any shark's life. To understand the Greenland shark fully is to see it as a survivor of a slow world, a creature whose entire mode of existence belongs to an older and more constant order than the fast, changeable one that now surrounds it. Sharks as a group are ancient, their lineage extending back through hundreds of millions of years, and the deep, cold environments in which the sleeper sharks live are among the most stable and long-enduring on the planet. The Greenland shark's way of life, slow, cold-adapted, long-lived, economical, is suited to an environment that changes little across vast spans of time, and it is the product of a long history of adaptation to exactly such conditions. In the constancy of the cold deep, there was no premium on speed, no reward for haste, no pressure toward the fast metabolisms and short, urgent lives that characterize animals of more variable environments. The premium was on endurance, economy, and persistence, and the Greenland shark is what a long history of such conditions produced. An animal built for a slow, stable, enduring existence in a world that scarcely changes. Seen this way, the Greenland shark is a kind of living relic, not in the sense of a primitive or outdated animal, but in the sense of a creature whose way of life belongs to a slower and older order of things. Its centuries-long lifespan, its glacial pace, its near constancy across time, all reflect an adaptation to a world of a kind that is becoming rarer as the planet's stable environments are disturbed. The animal embodies a tempo of life that the fast, warming, human-altered world increasingly excludes, and its persistence into the present is the persistence of an older way of being, carried forward by an animal precisely fitted to conditions that are now, for the first time in its long history, beginning to change. The Greenland shark is ancient, not merely in its years, but in its whole manner of existence, a slow creature from a slow world, surviving into a fast one. This antiquity gives the animal a significance beyond the sum of its remarkable features. It stands as a representative of a mode of life that the deep, cold, stable places of the earth made possible, and that those places may not much longer sustain. In the Greenland shark, the slow and enduring aspect of life on this planet finds one of its fullest expressions, an aspect easily overlooked in a world that prizes speed and change, but no less real and no less a part of what life on Earth has been. The animal is a reminder that life includes not only the fast and the fleeting, but the slow and the enduring, and that among the strangest and most impressive things the natural world has produced is an animal that does everything slowly, for a very long time, in the cold and the dark, and has done so, in one form or another, across an antiquity far exceeding even the centuries of a single shark's remarkable life. For all that the recent decades have revealed about the Greenland shark, the list of what remains unknown is longer than the list of what has been established, and it is worth setting out that list plainly, because the open questions define the frontier of the animal's study and convey, better than any summary of settled facts, how much of the shark still lies beyond reach. The Greenland shark is an animal known chiefly by its mysteries, and the mysteries are not vague gaps but specific, identifiable questions awaiting answers. The reproduction of the shark is unknown in almost every particular. No one has observed Greenland sharks mating. The courtship and copulation of the species have never been documented. The gestation period is estimated, from indirect reasoning, at somewhere between 8 and 18 years, but has never been measured, and if it lies at the upper end, it would be among the longest of any vertebrate. The number of young a female produces is disputed across an enormous range, from around 10 to several hundred, because so few pregnant females have ever been examined. The location where the sharks give birth is barely known, hinted at only by a rare cluster of newborns near the mid-Atlantic ridge. An entire phase of the animal's life, its origin, its earliest years, the whole process by which one generation gives rise to the next is essentially undocumented. The behavior of the shark holds comparable mysteries. The central puzzle of how so slow an animal catches fast-moving prey remains unresolved. The sleeping seal hypothesis, a plausible inference rather than a witnessed fact. The full extent of the shark's range, and the degree to which it truly wanders the deep ocean of the world, is unsettled, complicated by the difficulty of distinguishing it from its close relatives and by evidence of hybridization. The life cycle of the parasite that blinds it is only partly understood, and the mechanism of its extraordinary longevity, the actual biological basis of a 5-century life, remains, despite the recent genome studies, a matter of hypotheses rather than established causes, awaiting the functional research that would turn candidate genes into confirmed explanations. Even the shark's most famous quality, its lifespan, is known only as a range hedged with wide uncertainty, no single individual's age precisely fixed. This catalog of the unknown is not a confession of failure, but a description of the frontier, and it is, in its way, part of what makes the Greenland shark so compelling. Here is a large, long-known animal described in 1801, hunted for centuries, familiar in outline to the peoples of the North, that has withheld, into the present decade, some of the most basic facts of its existence. The questions it poses are not exhausted but multiplying, each discovery revealing further depths of ignorance beneath it. The animal that has been established as the longest-lived vertebrate remains in how it breeds, how it hunts, how it lives so long, and where it goes. One of the great open problems of marine biology. Whatever future study reveals, the Greenland shark stands now as a reminder that the ocean still holds animals known well enough to be marveled at and poorly enough to remain genuinely mysterious, and that the boundary between the known and the unknown, even for so conspicuous a creature, runs closer to the surface than the confident tone of popular accounts would suggest. Underlying every feature of the Greenland shark's slow existence is a problem it must solve continuously. The problem of finding enough to eat in an environment where food is scarce, unpredictable, and hard-won. The cold, deep waters the shark inhabits are not rich larders. Food arrives sporadically, in the form of the occasional carcass or the difficult capture of live prey, and long intervals may separate one meal from the next. The Greenland shark's whole strategy of life can be understood as an answer to this problem, a way of surviving in an environment that offers little by needing little and wasting nothing. The foundation of that answer is the shark's extraordinarily low metabolic rate. An animal that runs its body slowly consumes energy slowly, and an animal that consumes energy slowly can survive on far less food than a faster-living creature of comparable size. The Greenland shark, with among the lowest metabolic rates of any large animal, has correspondingly modest energy requirements and can endure the long intervals between meals that its habitat imposes. Where a warm-blooded predator must eat frequently and abundantly simply to maintain its body temperature and fuel its active life, the cold Greenland shark, matching the temperature of its surroundings and moving barely at all, can subsist on much less, drawing out the energy from a single large meal across a long period of slow living. The slowness that defines the animal is, in this light, an adaptation to scarcity as much as to cold, a way of reducing the demand for food to a level that a food-poor environment can meet. The shark's feeding strategy is shaped by the same logic. An animal facing scarcity cannot afford to specialize narrowly or to reject available food, and the Greenland shark accordingly takes whatever it can, hunting live prey where it can catch it, scavenging the dead where it finds them, consuming fish, mammals, carrion, and the strange miscellany that turns up in its stomach. This opportunistic generalism is the feeding pattern of an animal that cannot count on any particular food source and must exploit all of them. Its acute sense of smell, its ability to detect and travel to distant food falls, and its capacity to consume large quantities when food is available and then endure long fasts when it is not, all serve the same end: extracting a living from an environment that yields food grudgingly and unpredictably. The Greenland shark is built to find the scattered meals of a poor sea and to make each one last. Seen as an economy, the Greenland shark's life achieves a remarkable efficiency. It takes in little, spends little, wastes little, and endures on the margins where more demanding animals could not survive. Its slowness, its low metabolism, its opportunistic diet, and its capacity for long fasts are the elements of a budget balanced against scarcity, and the balance is struck so successfully that the animal not only survives but attains, on this economical foundation, the longest life of any vertebrate. There is a coherence here that runs to the heart of the animal. The same economy that allows it to survive a poor environment is inseparable from the slow, long life that makes it extraordinary. The Greenland shark lives long, in part because it lives cheaply, and it lives cheaply because the cold, scarce world it inhabits permits nothing else. Among the many uncertainties surrounding the Greenland shark is one of a different character from the biological mysteries already described, and it bears directly on the animal's future. No one knows how many Greenland sharks there are. The size of the global population is genuinely unknown, and the difficulty of estimating it is itself instructive, revealing how hard it is to census an animal so slow, so deep, so widely dispersed, and so rarely encountered. The obstacles to counting the Greenland shark are formidable. The animal lives in remote, cold, often ice-covered waters, at depths, and in regions where systematic survey is difficult and expensive. It is thinly dispersed rather than concentrated, ranging across enormous areas of the Arctic and North Atlantic, so that encounters are scattered and irregular. It is encountered chiefly as bycatch caught incidentally in fisheries directed at other species and bycatch records. While they establish that the animal is present and being killed, provide an unreliable basis for estimating total abundance. And the difficulty of distinguishing the Greenland shark from its close relatives, together with the uncertainty about the true extent of its range, further complicates any attempt to count it. The result is that the most basic figure in the assessment of any species' conservation status, how many individuals exist, is, for the Greenland shark, essentially unavailable. This ignorance has serious consequences for the animal's protection. Conservation depends on knowing whether a population is stable, growing, or declining, and on estimating how much mortality it can sustain. Both require some knowledge of population size and trend. For the Greenland shark, that knowledge is largely absent. What is known is indirect and alarming in its implications. The animal reproduces so slowly that it can sustain very little additional mortality, and it is being killed in substantial numbers as bycatch. The combination, an unknown population, a known vulnerability, and an ongoing source of death, is precisely the situation in which a species can decline unnoticed, its losses accumulating faster than they can be detected, because the baseline against which decline would be measured was never established. The revision of the shark's status to vulnerable reflects concern grounded in its biology rather than in any confident count of its numbers. The uncounted population of the Greenland shark is thus both a scientific gap and a conservation hazard, and it completes the portrait of an animal known in a strangely uneven way. Its lifespan has been measured to within a range of centuries. Its numbers cannot be estimated at all. Its genome has been sequenced. The size of its population is a mystery. This pattern, the exotic established, while the fundamental remains unknown, recurs so consistently in the study of the Greenland shark that it may be taken as characteristic of the animal, and its practical edge is sharpest here, where the failure to know how many sharks exist leaves the species exposed to a decline that could occur and progress far before anyone was in a position to observe it. An animal that has survived for millions of years, and whose individuals survive for centuries, may prove vulnerable in the end, partly because it is so difficult even to count. The Greenland shark, assembled from all that this account has described, resolves finally into a single coherent creature. and the principle that unifies it is the one that has recurred at every turn: time, and the slowness that stretches an animal's life across so much of it. Every feature examined here, the cold-adapted body, the near-frozen metabolism, the parasite-clouded eyes, the sense of smell that replaces sight, the diet won by patience rather than speed, the toxic flesh, the century-and-a-half childhood, the centuries of adult life, the reproduction so slow it endangers the species, belongs to a single strategy of slow, economical, enduring existence in the cold and the dark. The shark is not a collection of curiosities, but the varied expression of one deep principle. And that principle is the extension of a life across a span of time that no other vertebrate attains. What the Greenland shark ultimately offers, beyond the catalog of its remarkable traits, is a demonstration of what is possible at the far edge of one of life's fundamental variables. Animals occupy an enormous range of tempos, from the fly that lives its whole life in weeks to the whale that lives for 2 centuries. And the Greenland shark sits at the extreme slow end of that range, further out than any other animal with a backbone. It shows that a vertebrate body can be maintained, functioning, hunting, and reproducing across the better part of 500 years, that a life can be conducted so slowly that its childhood alone outlasts most other animals entire, that an environment cold and stable enough can support an existence measured against the ages of human history. In doing so, it expands the understood limits of animal life, marking the outer boundary of how slowly and how long a vertebrate can live. The animal carries, too, a lesson about the relationship between knowledge and mystery, for it is at once among the most extraordinary and among the least understood of large animals. Its greatest secrets were revealed only in the last few years, by methods that read its age from its eyes and its longevity from its genes, and yet its most basic behaviors, how it mates, how it hunts, how it lives so long, remain unresolved. The Greenland shark stands at the intersection of the spectacularly established and the frankly unknown, a creature whose study has produced both remarkable answers and a lengthening list of questions, and it serves as a caution against the assumption that a large, long-known animal has given up its secrets. The deep, cold, slow places of the ocean still hold creatures that human knowledge has barely begun to reach. In the end, the Greenland shark endures as a figure of a particular kind of time, the slow, deep, enduring time of the cold ocean. So unlike the fast and fleeting time of the human world above it, it moves through its centuries at a pace that human observation can scarcely follow. In an environment that scarcely changes, unaware of the ages it crosses, indifferent to the histories that unfold and conclude while it swims on, that an animal should live so long, so slowly, and so entirely outside the human scale of time is among the stranger facts the natural world has to offer, and it reframes the ordinary sense of what a life can be. The measure of the Greenland shark is not its size or its ferocity or even its blindness, but its duration. A single life long enough to hold the whole of the modern age, drawn out in the cold and the dark, at the slowest pace any vertebrate has ever kept, a reminder that among all the ways of being alive on this planet, one of the most remarkable is simply to persist, quietly and unhurried, for a very long time.